Chapter 508. The Human Realm. Dozens of death guards from the mansion of the dead sat cross-legged in the void. Fatso Huang and Gu Beichen stood side by side. They had been standing in the retrograde passage for a full 10 years. Other than cultivating and meditating to suppress their realms every day, they looked anxiously at the retrograde passage, hoping that the person they had been waiting for thousands of years would appear once again. Rumble. Suddenly, the world turned dark and the surroundings shook. The boundless world collapsed inch by inch. The incomplete laws of this world were completely disrupted, as if an extremely terrifying entity was descending upon this world. Buzz! The retrograde passageway was opening, and the gloomy door was glowing. A slender figure walked out from the retrograde passageway. When he appeared, the space-time of this world was distorted to the extreme, as if the world was about to collapse. Yi Xian was dressed in black, and his jet-black hair hung behind his head. Although there was no aura leaking out from his body, the entire human world was rumbling and trembling. It was as if his appearance had caused the will of the world to be terrified to the extreme. 10,000 years in a glance, an empty dream. When Yi Xian's appearance was reflected in the eyes of Fatso Huang and the others, whether it was Fatso Huang, Gu Beichen, or the death guards from the mansion of the dead, everyone felt as if they had fallen into a dream. However, their bodies could not help but tremble slightly. It was as if they had fallen into a dream. They could not believe it. When Yi Xian appeared in front of them, everyone's fists were clenched tightly. They even had the urge to roar at the sky. It was said that men did not cry easily. However, Fatso Huang and the others' eyes were red, and a large amount of mist appeared in their eyes. This mist turned into a line of clear tears that slowly flowed out from the corners of their eyes. Sir! Fatso Huang finally could not control his emotions. The thousands of years of waiting made him cry out loud. He was like a childish child who had been away from home for many years, and finally saw his closest kin. Sir, you're finally back. Gu Beichen's body trembled and tears appeared in his tiger-like eyes. He even bowed to Yi Xian, and the death guards all bowed to Yi Xian. The vicissitudes of life, the vicissitudes of time, yet you are still alive. How wonderful! Looking at his former subordinate, even though Yi Xian was a cold-hearted person, something called being moved grew in his heart. In the end, he blurted out these words. Sir, Fatso Huang kowtows to you. Fatso Huang's body was bloated. Thousands of years had passed, and his face was covered with vicissitudes of life. However, at this moment, he was crying and kowtowing to Yi Xian. This also proved how emotional he was. You rascal, get up quickly. Yi Xian strolled over and helped Fatso Huang up. With a wave of his hand, Gu Beichen and the rest could no longer kneel. Brother Huang, Xueji did not let you down. Xueji's cheerful voice sounded. Her beautiful face was also filled with joy, happy laughter and tears of joy. When Yi Xian returned to the human realm, the worry on the faces of Fatso Huang and the rest disappeared. They all gathered around Yi Xian and chattered nonstop. It was as if they wanted to tell him how much they missed Yi Xian in the past thousands of years. Looking at Fatso Huang and the rest in front of him, Yi Xian could not stop smiling. Only Fatso Huang and the rest made him feel a sense of familiarity. After all, before he became an immortal, Fatso Huang and the rest had always been by his side. From Fatso Huang and the rest's narration, Yi Xian had a rough understanding of what had happened in the human realm in the past thousands of years. The former Wuan agency, Qinglong Tianyu, and the rest had already died under the passage of time. Tieli and Linglong had extraordinary aptitudes, but their souls had dissipated during the 9 heavens' immortal tribulations. There were also many former subordinates of Yi Xian in the underworld. Some of them had died in battle, while others had died of old age in the mortal world. Although those with extraordinary aptitudes had cultivated to the late stage of the tribulation stage, they still fell under the immortal tribulations. Everything had changed. People and things of the past had been annihilated in the long river of time. Only Fatso Huang and the rest still believed that Yi Xian would return. They had been suppressing their cultivation and waiting for Yi Xian's return. This made Yi Xian sigh. Time was the most ruthless. Not only could it take away a person's life, it could also bury everything. Perhaps after thousands of years, The human realm would only be a piece of ancestral land in the depths of Yi Xian's memories. Mister, are you sure you can help us pass the 9 heavens' immortal tribulations? Fatso Huang asked worriedly. Before Yi Xian could answer, Xue Jiayi excitedly said, Brother Huang, you don't know. In the Earth Immortal Realm, Martial Uncle is. Unfortunately, before Xue Jiayi could finish, Yi Xian interrupted her with a smile. All of you are in the late stage of the tribulation stage. Your bodies are filled with true essence. If you attract the immortal tribulations now, I naturally have a way to help you all become immortals. Hearing Yi Xian's words, Fatso Huang and the rest were stunned. They looked at each other and saw the worry in each other's eyes. It was no wonder that Fatso Huang and the rest were so worried. One had to know that the 9 heavens' immortal tribulations were extremely terrifying. In the past thousands of years, countless tribulation stage cultivators had died under the immortal tribulations. No one could survive. Now, Yi Xian wanted them to attract the 9 heavens' immortal tribulations together. This was simply unimaginable. They were extremely worried. Mister, are you sure you can help us pass the 9 heavens' immortal tribulations together? Fatso Huang asked with a trembling voice. Looking at Fatso Huang's panicked look, Yi Xian smiled and said, What's wrong? We haven't seen each other for thousands of years. Don't you have any confidence in me? How can I not believe you, mister? I will attract the immortal tribulations now. Fatso Huang had always had blind trust in Yi Xian. This also made him grin. Without any reservation, he directly revealed his cultivation at the late stage of the tribulation stage. At the same time, Gu Beichen and the rest also looked at each other and smiled. They had already suppressed their cultivation to the extreme. They no longer held back. Rumble. More than 10 cultivators in the tribulation stage released their cultivation, which also made the world roar. However, as time went by, Fatso Huang and the rest were stunned. The sky was clear and the wind was gentle. The so-called 9 heavens' immortal tribulations did not come. There was no change in the world. Even the spiritual qi in the world did not fluctuate. What's going on? Fatso Huang said in shock. Obviously, this situation made him extremely puzzled. Interesting. It seems that the will of the world is so suppressed by me that it doesn't even dare to send the 9 heavens' immortal tribulations. Yi Xian sighed. He already knew what was going on. As the Daoyuo Jingxian, Yi Xian could destroy the human world with a thought. Although he did not reveal any power at the moment, how could the will of the world not feel his horror? How could it dare to send the 9 heavens' immortal tribulations in front of him? Tribulations come. Suddenly, Yi Xian's palm brushed through the air, causing the winds and clouds in the entire human world to change. The boundless sky suddenly darkened, and the terrifying lightning wreaked havoc in the clouds. There were even heaven-burning flames burning in the air. Chapter 509. Rumble. The laws of heaven and earth were suppressed, and the boundless spiritual qi was in chaos. Under the control of Yi Xian, the immortal thunder and heavenly fire were falling, striking towards Fatso Huang and the others in horror. Crack. Something amazing happened. The immortal thunder and heavenly fire attacked Fatso Huang and the others, but it did not cause them any harm. Instead, it nourished their bodies, and an unimaginably pure immortal power was changing their primordial spirits and bodies. Fatso Huang and the others could not believe that such a strange thing was really happening to them. However, the comfortable feeling that came from their bodies and minds intoxicated them, and the spiritual qi around them turned into the celestial light. In fact, Fatso Huang and the others did not know that the so-called immortal tribulation of the 9 heavens was extremely terrifying. If they tried to pass it by themselves, they would be courting death. However, Yi Xian's appearance changed everything. He could even suppress the will of heaven and earth, and controlling the so-called immortal tribulation of the 9 heavens was as easy as drinking water. After half a day, the boundless black clouds dissipated, and the immortal thunder and heavenly fire dissipated without a trace. Fatso Huang and the others were covered by the celestial light, and they were all sitting cross-legged in the void, breathing in and out spiritual qi. Obviously, with the help of Yi Xian, they had directly become celestial immortals, and had broken away from their mortal bodies. Sir. Fatso Huang suddenly opened his eyes, and when his eyes opened and closed, there was a flash of immortal light, and an extremely excited expression appeared on his face. How long had it been? More than 6,000 years? He had finally become an immortal. Not only him, Fatty Huang, but Gu Beichen and the dozen or so death god's personal guards had also become immortals. From now on, they would truly be able to follow Yi Xian. How could this not make Fatty Huang extremely excited? Early stage celestial immortal, not bad. When you enter the earth immortal realm, and the laws of heaven and earth are complete, your cultivation should be able to increase greatly. Looking at the celestial light on Fatso Huang and the others, Yi Xian nodded in satisfaction. However, he did not tell Fatso Huang and the others that their current cultivation was not worth mentioning in the earth immortal realm. Yi Xian had long thought of this. As the master of the three realms, he was in charge of the 33 celestial court. He had the peaches of immortality in his hands, and the immortal elixirs from the Tishita Palace. He could allow Fatso Huang and the others to increase their cultivation in an extremely short amount of time. However, Yi Xian did not say this now. He could only wait until he returned to the celestial court. Then, Yi Xian would focus on cultivating Fatso Huang and the others. After all, these people were his loyal subordinates in the past. Although Yi Xian did not trust anyone and had a cold temperament, he still had feelings for Fatso Huang and the others. This was also the reason why no one could replace Fatso Huang and the others. Sir, can we go to the earth immortal realm with you now? Fatso Huang calmed his excitement and hurriedly asked Yi Xian. He was deeply afraid that Yi Xian would leave alone again and repeat the events of the past. The human realm. Yi Xian placed his hands behind his back and looked at the entire human realm with his Dharma eyes. A touch of vicissitudes flashed across his eyes. Since I'm back, I'll take a look at the homeland where I was born and raised. I wonder if their graves still exist in the human realm after thousands of years. Yi Xian let out a sigh. He took a step forward and walked into the distance, causing Fatty Huang and the others to quickly follow. Green mountains and clear waters, birds chirping and flowers fragrant. This was a beautiful valley. A dense bamboo forest rippled in the blue waves. Yi Xian strolled in the bamboo forest. Fatso Huang and the others followed behind him. When Yi Xian reached the depths of the bamboo forest, several graves appeared in front of him. Yi Linger's grave, Mother Ye's grave, and of course Tuoba Yuntian and his son's grave. Thousands of years had passed. The tombstones had long been corroded. The names engraved on them had become extremely blurry. However, at this moment no one made a sound. No one dared to disturb Yi Xian. Yi Ling or Mother Yi. These were Yi Xian's only relatives. However, they had all died thousands of years ago. When Yi Xian stood in front of the graves of his relatives, his eyes drifted. A touch of loneliness and sorrow flashed across his eyes. He fell into an indescribable state. If Yi Xian was asked who he felt the most guilty towards in his life, it would be these two closest relatives. He had not been able to be a son. Even when Mother Yi was on her deathbed, he had not been by her side. As Yi Linger's brother, he had personally destroyed her happy family. The Tuoba family had vanished overnight. He had even personally seen his little sister commit suicide in front of him. This was the pain of Yi Xian's life. Little sister, mother, I'm back. Yi Xian muttered to himself. His voice was slightly hoarse. A decadent aura appeared around him. Only at this moment would Yi Xian show such a weak appearance. This was because for thousands of years, he had always been bathed in blood. He had swept away all his enemies. He had a will that would never admit defeat. However, when he faced the graves of his deceased relatives, his unswerving determination turned to nothing. He finally showed his human side. Yi Xian did not deliberately hide this state. This was because he was a human. Although he could be cruel and merciless, and could kill millions of creatures, there was still a weak spot in his heart. The stars moved, and the sun and moon alternated. Yi Xian stood there for 7 days and 7 nights. He seemed to have turned into an immovable rock. This made Fatso Huang and the others watch worriedly. They were afraid that Yi Xian would be too sad. When the sun rose on the 8th day, the sound of light footsteps came from behind them. This made Fatso Huang and the others' expressions change. They did not know why someone would appear in this valley. Who are you? A surprised voice rang out. A middle-aged man and woman were leading a young man towards the crowd. The voice also came from the middle-aged man's mouth. Clang! A ray of light shot out from the middle-aged man and turned into a spirit sword in his hand. The woman took out a red caltrip and looked nervously at Fatso Huang and the others. Clearly, this middle-aged man and woman were not mortals. They were cultivators through and through. However, their cultivation was not very high. They were only at the golden core stage. Freeze! Fatso Huang frowned. He pointed with his finger and fixed the middle-aged man and woman in place. Clearly, he could not allow anyone to disturb Yi Xian at a time like this. Father, mother, what's wrong? The young man was clearly their son. When he saw that his father and mother had been fixed in place, his young face suddenly became flustered. He even took out a sword to protect his father and mother. Who are you? What did you do to my father and mother? The young man trembled as he shouted. He looked at Fatso Huang and the others with fear in his eyes. Let them go. Suddenly, without waiting for Fatty Huang and the others to make a move, Yi Xian's unmoving body slowly turned around. When he opened and closed his eyes, he also looked at the family of three. Chapter 510. Yes, sir. Fatso Huang was slightly stunned, but he still quickly cast a spell to remove the restrictions on the couple. The couple hurriedly pulled the young man and retreated in horror. They looked at Fatso Huang and the others with extremely solemn gazes. The couple were both immortal cultivators. Although their cultivation levels were not high, they still had good eyesight. Although they could not see the cultivation levels of Fatso Huang and the others, their aura alone made them feel endless fear in their hearts. Clearly, these people were extremely powerful immortal cultivators. Tap, tap, tap. Yi Xian strolled over without any aura around him, as if he was immortal. However, the couple saw that these people with terrifying auras were all bowing to Yi Xian. Your surname is Yi? Yi Xian asked in a slightly fluctuating voice when he arrived in front of the couple. Junior Yi Tian is here today to worship our ancestors with my wife and son. If we have offended Senior in any way, please forgive us. Yi Tian hurriedly bowed, but the spirit light around his body was fluctuating. If Yi Xian wanted to attack his wife and son, he would be able to counterattack very quickly. Yi Tian. Yi Xian nodded. Through his bloodline, he could completely sense that this person was a descendant of the Yi family. Who is Yi Ping to you? Yi Xian asked calmly. Yi Ping is my ancestor. Senior, you are? Hearing Yi Xian's words, Yi Tian was slightly stunned. He then raised his eyes slightly to look at Yi Xian, and a trace of bewilderment flashed across his eyes. It was familiar, as if he had seen this person before, but Yi Tian could not recall where. However, the person standing in front of him gave him an extremely amiable feeling. You are indeed a descendant of my younger brother. Yi Xian nodded. He did not expect that today, thousands of years later, there were still members of the Yi family living in the world, and their bloodline had not been cut off. You are quite thoughtful. Yi Ping has been dead for thousands of years, but you still know to come and worship your ancestors. Yi Xian sighed, and his eyes were slightly drifting, as if he was recalling the past when he was a teenager. It was an autumn day with withered leaves and a bleak autumn wind. On a haystack, the two brothers sat with their backs against each other. Yi Ping's childish words rang in Yi Xian's ears. Brother, wait until the day I become successful. I will definitely let mother, little sister, and you live a happy life. The sonorous and forceful vow, and the youthful determination were the images in the depths of Yi Xian's memory. Yi Xian's youthful appearance also appeared in his mind. Yi Xian's family was no longer with him. Along the way, he only had the wind and the moon to accompany him. Behind him, there were only graves. The people and things of the past only existed in his memory. A single person, a single path, filled with endless vicissitudes of life and endless desolation. He could only step on a mountain of corpses and a sea of blood as he moved forward. And the only thing he left behind for the world was a lonely and bleak figure. Immortal ascension. What a tempting word. But who would know the helplessness and loneliness you would feel when you saw your loved ones die in front of you with your own eyes? Buddha said, there are 7 sufferings in life, greed, anger, infatuation, resentment, separation, unrequited love. Buddha said, life is bitter in the world. However, Buddha forgot to say, the path to immortality is long, accompanied by the wind. Years have passed, and we will never meet again. This is the greatest sorrow and hatred in life. 6,500 years. Perhaps in the eyes of immortals, it was just a process of cultivation, but in Yi Xian's eyes, he had experienced too much in the past 6,500 years. He rose from the sea of blood and revived from death. He came to the mortal world from the sea of blood and walked from the mortal world to the earth immortal realm. Today, 6,500 years later, he finally ascended to the position of the celestial emperor and stood at the top of the three realms. He was peerless in his generation and could be said to be unprecedented. This was Yi Xian's life. But when he suddenly looked back, his loved ones were no longer around. There was no one left in the world. Besides his subordinates who revered him, there was no one by his side who understood him. The loneliness around Yi Xian became even stronger, causing Fatty Huang and the others to be worried. As for the family of three, they looked at Yi Xian with complicated gazes. They didn't know why this mysterious person in front of them was so sad. The moon waxed and waned and all was silent. When the sun set, a crescent moon rose. Moonlight poured down like ripples, illuminating the bamboo forest without a speck of dust. Yi Xian's thoughts also returned at this moment. Buzz! Yi Xian waved his hand, and the void rippled slightly. A white jade slip appeared, and Yi Xian handed it to the young man in front of him. This cultivation method is not a powerful cultivation method, but it allows one to cultivate steadily to the celestial immortal stage, without the risk of qi deviation. This can be considered a gift from me to the descendants of the Yi clan, Yi Xian said calmly. The young man took the jade slip in a daze, and then looked at his parents nervously. This made Yi Tian quickly come back to his senses. He pulled the young man and bowed to Yi Xian. Thank you for your generous gift, senior. May I know senior's name? Do you know the ancestors of our Yi clan? Unfortunately, Yi Xian did not answer Yi Tian's question. Instead, he smiled and walked out of the bamboo forest. Fatso Huang and the others quickly followed. It was not until Yi Xian and the others disappeared in the bamboo forest that the family of three came back to their senses. Father, who is this person? The young man held the jade slip and asked his father in confusion. Brother Tian, why do I feel like I've seen this person somewhere before? Li Xiaoya asked in confusion, as if she was searching for memories of Yi Xian. All of a sudden, Li Xiaoya's expression changed drastically, and her eyes froze. She then suddenly looked at Yi Tian, and said in an extremely anxious voice, Brother Tian, take a photo. Looking at how anxious his wife was, Yi Tian was stunned, and he asked in puzzlement, Xiaoya, don't be anxious. Tell me slowly, what photo is it? Brother Tian, it's a photo of Yi Ping's ancestor when he was young. It's the photo that has been passed down in the Yi clan, Li Xiaoya said in a trembling voice, as if she had discovered something major. Hearing his wife's anxious words, Yi Tian's expression changed drastically, and he hurriedly opened the Meru space. An extremely well-preserved but yellowed photo appeared in Yi Tian's hand. It was a black and white photo that was extremely old. It was a family photo. In the photo, there was a young Mrs. Yi, a tender Yi Ling, and Yi Ping's youthful appearance. However, at this moment, the couple gasped and stood rooted to the ground. In the black and white photo, there was a young man with a determined expression on his face. He was holding his younger brother and sister's shoulders and smiling at the couple. He was Yi Xian in his youth. Although Yi Xian's appearance was slightly different from when he was a teenager, the changes were not that obvious. When the two faces merged into one in the couple's mind, it also made their bodies tremble violently. He's Yi Xian's ancestor? Suddenly, Yi Tian cried out in shock. He fell to the ground powerlessly and stared at the photo in his hand. His entire being became speechless. It's Yi Xian's ancestor. It must be Yi Xian's ancestor. There has always been a legend among the ancestors that when ancestor Yi Xian became an immortal and left, he even created a new era for the world. That was how cultivators appeared in the world. I initially thought that this legend was fake, But now it seems that there's no falsehood at all. Yi Tian murmured while trembling. He was already so agitated that he couldn't put his words into words. Hurry, Lin. Hurry and see what kind of technique is in this jade slip, Li Xiaoye said excitedly, and hurriedly told the young man to open the cultivation technique in the jade slip. Seeing how agitated his parents were, the young man dared not delay at all. He hurriedly injected spiritual power into the jade slip in his hand, and the next scene made the family of three completely dumbfounded. Buzz! Immortal light circulated and spiritual text appeared. Mysterious runes spread out, and immortal music echoed in the ears of the family of three. The immortal music that came from the jade slip actually made the cultivation level of the family of three increase rapidly. That made them dumbfounded and speechless. Immortal scripture. It's an immortal scripture. He really is Yi Xian's ancestor. Yi Tian's face flushed red. He was so excited that he couldn't control himself. His eyes were red at this moment, and large amounts of tears flowed out of his eyes. He cried loudly in the bamboo forest, hoping that Yi Xian would reappear in front of him. Unfortunately, Yi Xian never intended to reunite with the descendants of the Yi family. No matter how much Yi Tian begged, Yi Xian never appeared in front of him. Chapter 511. Yi Xian strolled in the sky, followed by Fatso Huang and the others. Along the way, half of the human world was seen by Yi Xian, but the aura around Yi Xian's body became more and more indifferent. The human world was still the human world, but there were no people or things familiar to Yi Xian in the boundless secular world, which made Yi Xian gradually indifferent to the human world. Jiangnan City. Technology and cultivation coexisted. Although the two paths were different, they went hand in hand. From time to time, cultivators could be seen passing by in the sky, and magnetic levitation airships shuttled back and forth in the air. Yi Xian strolled in the sky, overlooking Jiangnan City below, but he could no longer find the familiar scene in his memory. Which cultivator is so unruly, ignoring the no-fly order? Suddenly, a dozen streamers rose into the sky and appeared directly in front of Yi Xian and the others. The leader was a young woman with a curvaceous body and an extremely stunning appearance. Get lost. Fatso Huang did not have the so-called protective feelings for the fairer sex. At this moment, Yi Xian was revisiting the old place. How could he let these ants disturb him? Fatso Huang coldly scolded them. How dare you? Being scolded by Fatso Huang, the young woman was slightly stunned. Then, she came back in an instant, with shame and anger on her face. A dozen cultivators instantly surrounded Yi Xian and the others in the center. You are courting death. Fatso Huang's face instantly darkened. The divine light around him was faintly emitting, which made the world rumble and shake. The power of an immortal was undoubtedly revealed, as if he would kill all these people in front of him in the next moment. Immortal! Immortal! When the young woman saw the divine light around Fatso Huang, her shame and anger instantly turned into horror. Her beautiful eyes were wide open, full of fear. How is this possible? How can you be an immortal? The young woman was horrified. However, when she saw Gu Beichen and the others, she felt her entire body go limp. That was because at this moment, not only had Fatso Huang revealed his cultivation level as a celestial immortal, but Gu Beichen and the 10 or so members of the Mansion of the Dead were also radiating with immortal light. When the young woman saw over 10 heavenly immortals appear before her, it simply caused her to feel as if she had fallen into a dream, and she was unable to wake up for a long time. Binger! Suddenly, a beam of light shot up into the sky from Jiangnan City, and a woman with a graceful figure quietly appeared in the void. When this person appeared, Fatty Huang and the others were stunned, and the immortal light around them slowly dissipated. Master, they're immortals! The young woman cried out in horror. She instantly arrived in front of her master, and looked at Yi Xian and the others with an even more terrified expression. Yin Mingyao, an old friend from the past. An old friend so long ago that Yi Xian had almost forgotten her existence. If Yi Xian remembered correctly, this woman was once Yi Ling's teacher when he returned to the city from the Blood Sea battlefield. She had interacted with him and his family many times. However, Yi Xian did not expect that after thousands of years, Yun Mengyao was still alive in this world, and even appeared in front of him at this moment. At this moment, not only did Yi Xian recognize the people who had come, but Yun Mengyao was also slightly startled when she saw Fatso Huang and the others. However, when she saw Yi Xian from the corner of her eye, she seemed to have turned into a clay puppet and no longer made any sound. "Long time no see," Yi Xian said gently. Long time no see." Yun Mengyao woke up from her daze and regained her cool appearance. However, if one looked carefully, they would discover that her fists were slightly clenched and her fingernails dug into her palms without her noticing. This proved that Yun Mengyao was not as calm as she appeared to be. After thousands of years, the two of them met again and greeted each other. Then they became silent. I never thought that I would be able to see you again in my lifetime." After a dozen breaths, Yun Mengyao broke the silence first. "Yes, it's been more than 6,000 years. It's fate that we can meet again." Yi Xian sighed. He could not help but sigh in his heart. Perhaps Yun Mengyao was the last old friend he had in the human world. Listening to the conversation between her master and Yi Xian, Li Bing's eyes were filled with shock. She looked at Yi Xian with an extremely shocked gaze, because she had always heard Yun Mengyao mention a man. Ever since she followed Yun Mengyao, she had always remembered the legend of this man. Li Bing was extremely intelligent. She could completely understand from the conversation between the two that this mysterious man was most likely the man her master had always mentioned. This made her secretly look at Yi Xian curiously. "We haven't seen each other for thousands of years. Don't you want to come over to my place?" Yun Mengyao invited with a smile. However, she bit her lips slightly. Clearly, she also knew that Yi Xian was too heartless and might refuse her invitation. Okay. Yi Xian smiled and did not refuse Yun Mengyao's invitation. After all, Yun Mengyao might be the last old friend he had in the human world. A small house with flowing water. The sound of wind chimes. This was a manor with mountains and rivers. It was filled with an ancient charm, and was also Yun Mengyao's residence. The stream gurgled endlessly, the willows swayed in the wind, and there was a large amount of vegetation planted everywhere. In the pavilion, Yi Xian and Yun Mengyao sat opposite each other. There were 2 jade cups and a jug of jade wine. There was nothing else. Yun Mengyao lifted the jug of wine and filled their cups. The wine was dark green and slightly viscous. It rippled slightly in the wine cups and emitted an intoxicating wine fragrance. "Please." Yun Mengyao held the cup with both hands and raised her head to drink the wine. Yi Xian lightly smiled as he poured the wine into his mouth. For a moment, the two of them were speechless, and the atmosphere became slightly oppressive. In fact, Yi Xian was not stupid. He could completely see a trace of emotion in Yun Mengyao's eyes. Although Yun Mengyao tried her best to hide it, Yi Xian's mind was extremely sensitive. How could he not feel it? "Yi Xian, have you ever liked me? Even if it was just a little bit." Yun Mengyao lowered her eyes and drank the wine in the cup again. She finally said the words that had been in her heart for thousands of years. She raised her head and looked at Yi Xian. Yi Xian didn't expect Yun Mengyao to be so straightforward. This made him slightly stunned, and he didn't know how to answer Yun Mengyao's question. In the past, the two had interacted. Mother Yi also wanted to promote a good thing between him and Yun Mengyao. However, back then, Yi Xian only wanted to become an immortal and didn't care about the so-called love between men and women. Is it really so hard to answer? Looking at Yi Xian's silence, Yun Mengyao laughed self-deprecatingly. Her eyes were slightly red at this moment. On this day, no one knew what the two talked about. However, when Yi Xian walked out of the pavilion, a faint sobbing sound came from the small house. The 6 desires were emotionless, and the heaven and earth were heartless. This was the path that Yi Xian wanted to walk. He didn't care about the love of the mortal world. Although Yun Mengyao did have feelings for him, Yi Xian didn't want to be tainted by these feelings. Chapter 512. What was love in this world? It made people pledge their lives to each other. To Yi Xian, love was nothing more than a lowly and laughable thing. He had never fallen in love with any woman. What was love? In Yi Xian's creed, love was nothing more than bullshit. Xia Qingzhu, a name Yi Xian had almost forgotten. She was his childhood sweetheart, but so what? In Yi Xian's memories, he had personally wrung Xia Qingzhu's neck and sent both father and daughter to hell. From that moment on, the word love was nothing more than a joke to Yi Xian. Yi Xian didn't believe in love at all. Yun Mingyao. Yi Xian had to admit that this woman was as gentle as water, and indeed had feelings for him. However, to Yi Xian, Yun Mingyao still couldn't forget him after thousands of years. Her so-called feelings for him might just be a kind of longing that couldn't be obtained. Moreover, in Yi Xian's mind, if he had been immortal back then, Yun Mingyao wouldn't have taken a fancy to him at all. The main reason was that he had swept away all his enemies along the way, and was now the celestial emperor of the three realms. To put it bluntly, a woman's so-called love was nothing more than a man's strength. Although Yi Xian's thoughts were a little extreme, this was the truest feeling in his heart. Outside the flowing water villa, Fatso Huang and the others were sitting cross-legged in the void. When Yi Xian walked out of the flowing water villa, Fatso Huang and the others quickly got up. However, when they looked at Yi Xian, a complicated look flashed through their eyes. Obviously, Fatso Huang and the others were very familiar with the past between Yun Mingyao and Yi Xian. In fact, they also wanted Yun Mingyao to become Yi Xian's partner. However, only Yi Xian had walked out of the flowing water villa. This also proved that Yi Xian hadn't accepted Yun Mingyao's feelings. Yi Xian. Suddenly, just as Yi Xian was about to leave, a sorrowful female voice came from behind him. This also made Yi Xian stop and frown slightly. Yi Xian had already made it very clear that the two of them were only friends. Perhaps they couldn't even be considered friends, because he hadn't interacted with Yun Mingyao back then. If there was any interaction between them, it would be because Yun Mingyao was Yi Ling'er's teacher. Because of Yi Ling'er's studies, the two of them had a brief contact. Yi Xian, has your heart always been so ruthless? Yun Mingyao was in tears. She had waited for thousands of years. Yi Xian's figure had always been engraved in the depths of her mind. During these thousands of years, there had been men pursuing her. She had also tried to forget Yi Xian, but these men were worlds apart from Yi Xian. She had also been waiting. She believed that Yi Xian would return from the immortal realm, so she wanted to ask him personally. However, in the flowing water villa, Yi Xian heartlessly rejected her, which hurt her greatly and made her feel deeply unreconciled. Thousands of years of waiting in exchange for Yi Xian's heartless words. Even though Yun Mingyao was a gentle woman, how could she be reconciled? In the void, Yi Xian slowly turned around and looked indifferently at Yun Mingyao. Even though her face was full of tears, he didn't move at all. Go back. You are already in the late stage of the tribulation realm. With the 9 dragons fire shield I gave you, you can safely pass through the 9 heavenly tribulations, Yi Xian said calmly. Yi Xian, let me follow you. Even if you don't love me, let me be your maid. Yun Mingyao's voice trembled. She bit her lips until they bled. She looked hopefully at Yi Xian, only hoping that Yi Xian would nod to her. Unfortunately, Yun Mingyao's hopeful eyes gradually turned into despair because Yi Xian didn't make any move to agree. She could feel Yi Xian's cold gaze. 3,000 years of prosperity passed in the blink of an eye. The love in the world has nothing to do with me. If you want to reach the peak of the immortal realm, the so-called love can only be the biggest inner demon on your path of cultivation. The 6 desires were emotionless. Heaven and earth were heartless. There was no indecisiveness or ambiguity. Yi Xian's voice was cold and straightforward. He suddenly turned around. Yi Xian took a step forward. Ripples blossomed under his feet. Space and time were in chaos as he shot off into the distance. This made Fatso Huang and the others sigh helplessly. They then quickly followed Yi Xian. Yun Mingyao's eyes were filled with despair as she watched Yi Xian's departing figure. Her heart was extremely bitter. Tears flowed uncontrollably from her beautiful eyes. She collapsed to the ground powerlessly. Meeting was fate, but not meeting was also fate. With a single thought, all rivers and mountains would be filled with love. With a single thought, the world would be filled with no love. To Yi Xian, even the number 1 beauty of the 3 realms, the Moon Fairy, couldn't make him fall in love, let alone Yun Mingyao. This was because Yi Xian's love had long been buried when he was young. Of course, Yi Xian was also a man. He naturally had male needs. However, Yi Xian's standards were extremely high. Only the moon fairy could arouse the flames in his heart. As for love, it didn't exist in the slightest. In a nameless valley, there was no one. Everything was silent. There was a tomb and a tombstone. The tombstone was already weathered. The inscription was also a little blurry. However, the words Lu Bai's tomb could be vaguely seen. Yi Xian was dressed in black. His black hair hung behind his head. When the wind blew, his hair fluttered in the wind. The hem of his clothes fluttered. Yi Xian sat cross-legged. Ripples blossomed in the void. Jars of fine wine were placed on the ground. Yi Xian casually opened the wine seal and poured a large amount of wine into his mouth. As the wine entered his stomach, Yi Xian exhaled turbid air. He looked at the tomb with a slightly sad expression. "Brother Bai, I'm here to see you," Yi Xian murmured in a low voice. Yi Xian sat cross-legged in the bleak wind. As the wine entered his mouth, Yi Xian became a little wild and unrestrained. There was also a hint of loneliness and desolation. "Brother Bai, if it weren't for the inverse immortal array diagram that you refined for me, I'm afraid my soul would have dispersed. Although you have passed away, Yi Xian will never dare to forget your kindness." The wine jars were turned upside down. As the wine entered his mouth, Yi Xian's eyes were in a trance. It was as if he saw Lu Bai smiling at him. "Brother Bai, after 6,500 years, I finally stepped into the Dalio Jingxian. I even killed the Jade Emperor with my own hands. Not only did I take his position as Celestial Emperor, I also wanted to suppress the three realms and reach the peak." As he drank more and more wine, Yi Xian seemed to be really drunk. His eyes became more and more blurry. This was because he had no friends in this world. Lu Bai was his only friend. Only in front of Lu Bai's tomb could he confide in him what he wanted to say. "Brother Bai, I once told you that when I became a saint, I would reverse the reincarnation of time and space and let you reappear in this world. I have never forgotten this oath." Yi Xian reeked of wine, but his voice was extremely solemn. A wisp of mist flashed across his blurry eyes. The sun rose and the moon set. The stars moved. The sun rose from the east and set in the west. 7 days and 7 nights had passed. Yi Xian didn't know how much wine he had drunk. The wine jars on the ground were in a mess. He kept murmuring, as if Lu Bai was right beside him, listening to him narrate the various experiences of 6,500 years. Chapter 513. 6,500 years. To Yi Xian, this was an extremely terrifying word. It was also an extremely long process. During these 6,500 years, he was either slaughtering or cultivating in seclusion every day. He did all of this so that he would not be trampled under the feet of others. He wanted to be above all others. Yi Xian was determined and extremely shrewd. His methods were cruel and tyrannical. However, he was also a human. There were times when he was tired and had many things on his mind that he wanted to talk to someone about. Whether it was in the Earth Immortal realm or the human realm, Yi Xian did not even have a close friend, let alone a lover. Lu Bai. He was the only friend that Yi Xian acknowledged. However, Lu Bai was no longer in this world. Back when Yi Xian refined the inverse immortal array diagram, Lu Bai's soul dissipated between heaven and earth. This was also one of Yi Xian's greatest regrets in his life. In this valley, Yi Xian's heart was very peaceful in front of Lu Bai's grave. He was also very relaxed. He was so relaxed that he had drunk a lot of wine and talked a lot. He just leaned against Lu Bai's grave and slept peacefully. Fatso Huang, Gu Beichen, Xue Jie, and a dozen or so members of the Mansion of the Dead stood in the distance. They were divided into 8 directions to guard this valley. They did not want anyone or anything to disturb Yi Xian. Everyone became very quiet, hoping that Yi Xian could sleep a little longer. Fatso Huang and the others had followed Yi Xian and witnessed the first half of Yi Xian's life. Although they did not know what Yi Xian had experienced in the Earth Immortal realm, they could guess that Yi Xian must have experienced a lot of hardships along the way. In Yi Xian's dream, it was as if he had returned to his childhood. He remembered too many joys and sorrows, bitterness, sweetness, and even hot-bloodedness. Yi Xian slept for half a year. During this time, he did not speak or move. Only his deep breathing proved that he was indeed in a dream. One day, half a year later, the sun rose from the east. Golden sunlight shone on this valley and reflected in Yi Xian's eyes. Yi Xian's eyelids moved slightly and then slowly opened. His eyes were slightly misty. However, as time passed, the confusion in his eyes gradually disappeared. His eyes became increasingly cold and indifferent. The languid aura around him also disappeared and was replaced by an unimaginably intimidating force. Rumble. It was as if thunder from the 9 heavens was exploding, as if the long river of stars was trembling. The wind and clouds in this area were changing, the violent winds were howling, and the void was collapsing. When Yi Xian slowly stood up from the ground, it was as if time and space had been frozen. Eternal golden millet is like a dream. I only know when I wake up today, Yi Xian said in a hoarse voice. A smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. He took a deep look at Lu Bai's grave, and then strolled out of the valley without any reluctance. Sir. Fatso Huang and the others bowed. Let's go. A simple word came out of Yi Xian's mouth. He took a step forward and soared into the sky. Fatso Huang and the others quickly followed. Sir, where are we going? Gu Beichen asked loudly. The Earth Immortal World. Yi Xian smiled. The dazzling radiance on his face was too frightening. It was as if he was the only one in the world. The aura of a celestial emperor rippled out from him. Yi Xian and the others walked through the mountains and rivers. They walked through the barren desert. Yi Xian did not return to the Earth Immortal World directly. Instead, he led Fatso Huang and the others around the entire Earth Immortal World. It was as if he was looking for something. Yi Xian was speechless. They walked around the Earth Immortal World. Fatso Huang and the others did not ask for the reason. This was because they knew that Yi Xian always had his own reasons for doing things. Yi Xian would naturally tell them what he needed to tell them. If Yi Xian did not want to tell them, it would be foolish of them to ask. Half a year later, Heartbreak Mountain. Heartbreak Mountain used to be the place where Yi Xian lived when he was young. This was because there was a Blood Sea battlefield in Heartbreak Mountain. Yuan Ling taught him here for 4 years, turning him from a weak young man into an immortal cultivator in the tribulation stage. Things remained the same, but people had changed. The mountains and rivers were destroyed. When Yi Xian returned to this place, Heartbreak Mountain no longer existed. It had been reduced to ashes during his battle with Yuan Ling. The Blood Sea battlefield had also been destroyed and dissipated. The only thing left was the reverse passage to the Earth Immortal World. The reverse passage was open. Astral winds, thunder, and fire were looming. To enter the Earth Immortal World through the reverse passage, one had to be at least at the level of a celestial immortal. Otherwise, entering the reverse passage with a mortal body would only result in the destruction of one's soul. The dark door glowed slowly. Yi Xian stood in front of the reverse passage. Fatso Huang and the others stood on his left and right. What surprised them was that Yi Xian did not enter the reverse passage. Instead, he looked around and his expression gradually became serious. Sir, you? Because Yi Xian did not speak or move, he must be thinking about something. This made Fatso Huang probe softly. The human world is the ancestral land that raised me. However, the human world is too weak. If someone were to find out that I walked out of the human world, it would definitely cause a lot of trouble. Yi Xian softly said. When he opened and closed his eyes, a trace of decisiveness flashed through them. Fatso Huang and the others were slightly stunned when they heard Yi Xian's words. Then they nodded. Just as Yi Xian said, the human world was too small compared to the Earth Immortal World. It was not an exaggeration to call it a drop in the ocean. The most important problem was that there were no immortals in the human world except for them. If any celestial immortal from the Earth Immortal World entered the human world, it would definitely cause a great turmoil. This was also something that Fatso Huang and the others did not want to see. However, when they heard Yi Xian's words, they were not stupid. Naturally, they guessed that Yi Xian definitely wanted to do something. After all, Yi Xian would never leave any hidden dangers for himself. Sir, you mean? Shuejiai asked softly. Have you heard of the Simmer of Heaven and Earth, the Universal Palm Technique? Suddenly, Yi Xian lightly smiled as he turned around to look at everyone. However, his smile was extremely unfathomable, causing everyone to suffocate as if something huge was about to happen. Sir, what is the summer of heaven and earth, the universal palm technique? Gu Beichen asked. Yi Xian strolled in the void. The aura around him gradually became stronger. An unfathomable power rose around him, causing the entire human world to shake slightly. There is a sage to be in the Earth Immortal world. His name is Immortal Zhen Yuan. He is also known as the ancestor of Earth Immortals. Legend has it that this Immortal Zhen Yuan's specialty is the universal palm technique. The so-called universal palm technique contains heaven and earth. It can swallow heaven and earth and form a world of its own. It can evolve the laws of heaven and earth. Even Daluo Jingxian would die if he was sucked into the universal palm technique. Even a sage-to-be is extremely wary of this Tongtian technique. Chapter 514. Yi Xian spoke tirelessly, as if he was telling a secret. Because Yuan Ling had once recorded the famous figures of the three realms in the immortal scripture, the ancestor of the Earth Immortals, the great immortal Zhen Yuan, was naturally included. Sir, you mean? Hearing Yi Xian's words, everyone was surprised. They had already vaguely guessed Yi Xian's thoughts. Yi Xian could completely sense the shock in everyone's hearts. This also made him smile slightly, and his expression became even more solemn. If you want to hide the human world, and not be discovered by the people of the Earth Immortal world, then the only way is to completely refine the human world for your own use. Only in this way can the existence of the human world not be discovered by others. Yi Xian smiled. Sir, could it be that you know the great immortal Zhen Yuan's heaven and earth sleeve technique? Xueji exclaimed, and her expression became somewhat excited. If Yi Xian really knew the heaven and earth sleeve technique, and took the human world into his hands, then they could return to the human world, at any time, without worrying about it being discovered. However, when this thought appeared in everyone's hearts, everyone looked at Yi Xian with extreme shock. Because although the human world was not big, it was still a world. Even if Yi Xian had become an immortal for thousands of years, how could he take a world into his hands? The heaven and earth sleeve technique is a unique technique of the great immortal Zhen Yuan. Even Emperor Ziwei was not taught it, so how could I know such a great Tongtian technique? Yi Xian paused for a moment before continuing. Although I don't know the heaven and earth sleeve technique, there is a secret technique in my cultivation method that has the same effect as the heaven and earth sleeve technique. This technique is called heaven devouring. As Yi Xian's words fell, his body bloomed with an extremely terrifying light. This was not the great Luo immortal light, but an extremely dark light. This light was mysterious and deep, and it could make people feel as if their souls were about to be sucked in at a glance. Rumble! The heavens and earth exploded as thunderclouds filled the sky. When Yi Xian revealed his unfathomable aura, the entire human world distorted, and the will of the heavens and earth that had been suppressed by Yi Xian all this time appeared. All of you leave. Yi Xian abruptly turned his head and coldly said. This also caused the expressions of Fatso Huang and the others to change slightly. They knew that Yi Xian was about to take action, and that something extremely terrifying would definitely happen. This also caused them to quickly flee into the distance. Wang! The firmament trembled. Thunder and lightning destroyed the world. Celestial annihilation thunder, celestial fusion fire, and extremely terrifying worldly laws fell towards Yi Xian. The firmament distorted as an extremely ferocious face appeared in the firmament. The human world was a place of exile. It evolved the worldly laws on its own, and it could be said to be a miniature world that was independent of the Earth Immortal world. Although the human world was not large, it was still a world with the will of the world operating within it. At this moment, Yi Xian wanted to refine the human world. Even though the will of the world was suppressed by him, how could it submit to Yi Xian? The will of the world was a type of operating law. If Yi Xian wanted to refine the human world, he had to subdue the will of the world. Even though he was the Daluo Jingxian, suppressing the world was still extremely difficult. Heaven devouring. The heaven devouring secret art was an extremely profound secret art from the forbidden section of the undying immortal scripture. and it possessed unfathomable might. This art did not belong to the three dimensions, nor was it restrained by the worldly laws. It was even on par with Grand Immortal Jin Yuan's universe creator. Rumble. The will of the world was furious and indignant. Although the will of the world was only a type of power of law, when it sensed the threat posed by Yi Xian, it directly displayed an extremely terrifying power, wanting to destroy Yi Xian between heaven and earth. Unfortunately, whether it was the immortal annihilating divine thunder, the divine fusion heavenly fire, or the endless worldly laws that bombarded Yi Xian, these attacks could not cause any harm to Yi Xian at all. Suppress! Yi Xian formed a seal with both hands, and the heaven-devouring secret art was displayed violently. Endless black fog burst out from Yi Xian's body, and the worldly laws were all annihilated. Its terrifying power was simply appalling. Rumble. The darkness was boundless, and it was like an illusion. The heaven-devouring secret art was too terrifying and mysterious. The ferocious face formed by the will of the world quickly dissipated, and the boundless darkness spread to the entire human world with Yi Xian as the center. At this moment, the souls of all living things trembled. In just an instant, the entire human world was completely shrouded in darkness. A soul-shaking power was born, and it also made all living things tremble from the bottom of their hearts. Heaven-devouring earth, infinite power. Above the sky, between heaven and earth, Yi Xian's black hair fluttered in the wind, and his black clothes rustled. His entire body seemed to have turned into a black vortex that was gradually devouring the will of the world. In fact, no one knew that Yi Xian wanted to refine the entire human world. It seemed like he wanted to hide it from the people of the Earth immortal world. But in fact, Yi Xian's biggest goal was to control the entire human world. The heaven-devouring secret art had another name, and it was called the Primordial Realm Secret Art. What was the Primordial Realm Secret Art? Yuan represented one. There was a saying in Taoism that all things came from one. It was said that Tao gave birth to one gave birth to two, and two gave birth to all things. To put it simply, Yuan represented chaos. Chaos was created as one, heaven and earth were born as two, and heaven and earth gave birth to all things as three. This was the philosophy and thinking of Taoism. This secret technique of the Yuan realm was not a technique of the three realms. It was suspected to be a technique from chaos, and it was recorded in the forbidden section of the Immortal Scripture. It was an extremely profound secret technique. To be honest, Yi Xian's cultivation of this secret technique was only at the beginning. However, with his current cultivation, refining a small human world was still within the scope of his ability. Time passed little by little. Large amounts of sweat appeared on Yi Xian's forehead, and the black fog around him became denser. Obviously, even if he was the Daoyuo Jingxian and walked the path of proving his Dao through strength, it was not that easy to refine the human world. If it was the Daoyuo Jingxian at the third watershed, even if he had cultivated the heaven-devouring secret technique, he would not have been able to refine the human world for his own use. This was because the bodies of immortals were weak and could not withstand the strange power of the heaven-devouring secret technique. However, Yi Xian was different. He walked the path of proving his Dao through strength and becoming a saint. The combination of the indestructible origin spirit and the origin immortal physique was not as simple as 1 + 1. It was an extremely terrifying power that allowed him to use the heaven-devouring secret technique. To put it bluntly, the strongest secret techniques in the forbidden section of the Immortal Scripture were prepared for those who used strength to prove their Dao. Only Yi Xian could use them. Time slowly passed as boundless darkness engulfed the human world. The will of the world was being obliterated inch by inch. A wave of understanding gradually appeared in Yi Xian's origin spirit. After a month had passed, the will of the heavens and earth had completely dissipated. The laws of heaven and earth in the entire human world surged out. But these laws of heaven and earth were controlled by Yi Xian, as if Yi Xian had become the master of these laws of heaven and earth. Chapter 515. Refining the mortal realm for his own use was Yi Xian's true objective. The mortal realm was too weak and useless to Yi Xian. However, Yi Xian had a vague feeling that refining the mortal realm would be of great use to him in the future. As for what use it would be, Yi Xian couldn't predict it now. However, the mortal realm was very important to him, and this premonition was very strong. This was also the reason why Yi Xian wanted to control the mortal realm. Buzz! Time seemed to stop, space seemed to be frozen, and the boundless darkness had already disappeared. Only a wisp of understanding appeared in Yi Xian's mind, and the corners of his mouth curled into a strange smile. Night! In the sky, Yi Xian pointed a finger at the sky, and an extremely shocking thing happened. The sky changed. The clear sky turned into a night sky. The sky was filled with twinkling stars, and there was even a great moon pouring down its night light. With just a thought, the day of the mortal realm turned into night. Sun rises and moon sets. When Yi Xian's voice resounded throughout the mortal realm, the moon slowly set, and a rising sun rose from the east. The night sky actually turned into day again. Wind comes. Violent winds howled in the world, and the entire mortal realm was swept up by a violent gale. Rain comes. Whoosh whoosh. Torrential rain whistled down, and the entire mortal realm was watered by the boundless rain. This miraculous scene was too shocking, and it was simply unbelievable. In the sky, Yi Xian stretched out his arms and bathed in the boundless rain. There was a trace of intoxication on his face. This was because the entire mortal realm had been refined by him, and he could use the mortal realm with just a thought. To put it bluntly, when Yi Xian executed the heaven-devouring secret technique, the will of the world in the mortal realm was obliterated by him. Yi Xian directly replaced the will of the world, and he also completely controlled the entire mortal realm. The rain stopped, and the sun rose. The entire mortal realm regained its tranquility. However, the phenomenon of the world caused by Yi Xian's will just now caused the living beings in the mortal realm to be extremely terrified. Sir! Fatso Huang and the others whistled over. Everyone was excited because they had just seen an unimaginable miracle. Although they didn't know what Yi Xian had done, they knew that the phenomenon of the world was caused by Yi Xian when they saw the intoxicated look on Yi Xian's face. With the mortal realm in my hands, I'm relieved. Yi Xian revealed a smile. He pointed out a finger, and the door to the reverse path opened wide. When he took a step out, he also entered the reverse path. This also caused Fatty Huang and the others to quickly follow. Everyone's faces were filled with excitement. Fatso Huang and the others knew that they were about to enter the legendary Earth Immortal realm. From then on, they would follow Yi Xian for thousands of years. In the retrograde passage, Yi Xian was strolling forward amidst the wind, thunder, and fire for thousands of miles. Fatso Huang and the others were extremely excited, but they didn't ask Yi Xian about the situation in the Earth Immortal realm. Of course, Fatso Huang and the others didn't know that Yi Xian was the master of the three realms. They also didn't know that Mr. Yi, who they used to follow, was a celestial emperor. Buzz! The void rippled as they entered the Earth Immortal realm. Spiritual chi that filled the sky and earth rushed towards them. It was definitely not something the small mortal realm could compare to. This also made Fatso Huang and the others intoxicated. Their cultivation levels were rising steadily, and they stepped into the mid-stage of the celestial immortal realm in one fell swoop. Withdraw! Yi Xian's body emitted a large amount of celestial light. He formed a strange celestial art with his palms and fingers, and instantly turned the retrograde passage into a 3-inch door. Then he directly put it into the Simmeru space. From then on, other than Yi Xian who could open the retrograde passage into the mortal realm, no other living beings would know about the existence of the mortal realm. The entire mortal realm had completely become Yi Xian's private property. The mortal realm had always been Yi Xian's hidden danger. This time, he had finally eliminated this hidden danger. This also made him feel extremely relieved. A smile also appeared on the corner of his mouth. Let's go. The sea was wide, and the sky was wide, and the sky was wide, and the sky was wide. Yi Xian took a step forward and directly headed for the 33rd Heaven Celestial Court. This also made Fatso Huang and the others quickly follow. This was because they believed that as long as they followed Yi Xian, no matter what enemy they faced, they wouldn't hesitate to die. The 33rd heaven of the celestial court. Thump, thump, thump. The celestial court's war drums beat as winds and clouds gathered from all directions. When Yi Xian brought Fatso Huang and the others to the southern celestial gate, the 4 heavenly kings were shocked and hurriedly bowed. Celestial Emperor. The 4 heavenly kings bowed. They were all immortals of the Chan sect, and could be said to be extremely domineering in the celestial court. However, since Yi Xian ascended to the throne, these immortals of the Chan sect didn't have an easy time. The current celestial court was no longer the same as when the Jade Emperor was still on the throne. Just look at the immortals of the celestial court. Which one of them wasn't infamous in the 3 realms? The immortals of the Jie sect and the Grand Luo immortals were by his side. Various ferocious demons were gathered under Yi Xian's command, and although there weren't many of them, their friends were all Daluo Jingxian. The 36 stars of the heavenly spirit, the 72 earthly fiends, the 28 mansions of the heavenly cycle, 100,000 celestial river navy, 1,000,000 celestial generals, various Grand Luo immortals, and 12 inspector heavenly ambassadors. There were also mighty figures recruited by Yi Xian to take up various positions. The forces under Yi Xian's command alone weren't inferior to any other orthodoxy. Moreover, Yi Xian held the title of Celestial Emperor and was nominally the ruler of the 3 realms. Prepare for the numinous sky hall. Yi Xian strolled through the southern celestial gate with his hands behind his back. His body bloomed with misty immortal light, and when the light dissipated, the Celestial Emperor battle robe was donned on him. The black and gold patterns were extremely dazzling, and a surge of the Celestial Emperor's might radiated from him. As you command, Celestial Emperor. The 4 heavenly kings bowed with reverence in their eyes. They even ordered the yellow-scarved strongman to blow the celestial court's horn, telling the immortals of the celestial court to head to the numinous sky hall for a meeting. Fatso Huang and the others were flabbergasted by this scene. They looked at Yi Xian's back in a daze, but all of them clenched their fists and tried their best to control their excitement. Although Fatso Huang and the others had just become Earth Immortals, they knew the name of the Celestial Court and the weight of the 2 words Celestial Emperor. However, none of them expected that Yi Xian would make such a name for himself in the Earth Immortal realm after more than 6,000 years, and that he was now the ruler of the 3 realms. Quick, keep up with the sir, Fatso Huang said with a trembling voice. Everyone don't call him that. This place is not like the mortal realm. Uncle Master is now the Celestial Emperor. To avoid arousing suspicion, we have to call him Celestial Emperor as well. Shuejiai hurriedly transmitted her voice to the others. This also caused Fatso Huang and the others to come to their senses. They nodded solemnly and followed Yi Xian on their immortal clouds. The 33 levels of the Celestial Court were incomparably beautiful. Immortal clouds surged, and the immortal palaces floating in the 33 levels of heaven were an eye-opener for Fatso Huang and the others. Chapter 516. However, Fatso Huang and the others tried their best to calm their agitated emotions. They followed behind Yi Xian like they did in the past, and all of them appeared cold and silent. Lingxiao Hall. The heavenly gate opened, and the immortals gathered. When Yi Xian entered Lingxiao Hall, the immortals of the Celestial Court all bowed and shouted the name of Yi Xian, the Celestial Emperor, causing the entire 33 floors of the Celestial Court to rumble. Such a scene and such power. Even though Fatso Huang and the others appeared to be very calm, their hearts were in turmoil. When they clenched their fists, they did not even realize that their nails had dug into their palms. Yi Xian ascended the throne of the Celestial Emperor, and Fatso Huang and the others stood beside him. This also surprised the immortals, and they all checked the cultivation of Fatso Huang and the others. However, when they felt that Fatso Huang and the others were only celestial immortals, a look of doubt appeared in their eyes. It should be known that those who followed Yi Xian were all very capable. Even if any of the celestial soldiers had the cultivation of a celestial immortal, these people were only celestial immortals. How could they follow Yi Xian? What was their relationship with Yi Xian? Great doubts arose in the hearts of the immortals of the Celestial Court, but they were not stupid enough to ask Yi Xian. If there is a memorial, The court will be dismissed if there is no memorial. Venus Tai Bai held a horsetail whisk, and her voice echoed in Lingxiao Hall. This was also a practice that had to be done every time a court meeting was held. It was to let the immortals report their own situation to the Celestial Emperor. Reporting to the Celestial Emperor, the Great Void sect of the lower realm has been destroyed. The Celestial Elder of the South Pole of the Chan sect has sent a letter of visit, saying that he will come to the Celestial Court 3 years later to pay his respects to the Celestial Emperor. The Golden Spirit Saintess bowed and directly presented a jade slip. Reporting to the Celestial Emperor, the pagoda-bearing Heavenly King and his son left a letter and left. They even took 100,000 celestial soldiers with them. Please make a decision. Shen Gongbao bowed and reported. Reporting to the Celestial Emperor, the Fungu country of the lower realm suffered a 10-year drought. We pray that the heavens will send a heavy rain. Uncle bowed and presented the memorial. All of a sudden, the immortals of the heavenly court asked for a beating. Regardless of whether it was a big or small matter, they all reported it to Yi Xian. This caused Yi Xian to frown slightly as the aura around him gradually turned cold. Cough. The Celestial Court was silent Celestial Emperor, was Celestial Court to silence to Celestial Court to immortals to the Celestial Court, to be reminded. Instantly, the uproar in the Lingxiao Hall quieted down. When the immortals of the Celestial Court felt the coldness around Yi Xian, all of them lowered their heads. The trifles of the 3 realms are endless. If I have to deal with these things every day, then what use do I have for you? Yi Xian narrowed his eyes. As Yi Xian's words fell, the immortals of the Celestial Court looked at each other, not knowing how to answer Yi Xian's question. The Celestial Emperor is wise. When the Jade Emperor was on the throne, he had to take care of court affairs every day. Everything had to be decided by the Jade Emperor. Now that you have just ascended to the position of the Celestial Emperor, you might not be used to it. Grand Preceptor Wen stepped forward, his voice sonorous and powerful. Although he was only a primordial Unity Golden Immortal, he was highly respected in the Celestial Court. At this moment he was speaking to Yi Xian solemnly. Suddenly, before Grand Preceptor Wen could finish his words, something extremely terrifying happened. Bang! With a loud explosion, flesh and blood flew everywhere. Grand Preceptor Wen's body exploded, and even his primordial spirit could not escape. He was killed by a beam of immortal light of the great all-heaven. Hiss! Gasps could be heard constantly. The immortals looked at Yi Xian in horror. Obviously, the one who killed Grand Preceptor Wen was Yi Xian himself. At this moment, the immortal light in Yi Xian's palm was dissipating. His expression was neither sad nor happy, and no one could tell what he was thinking. It was just that when he said he would kill someone, he would kill someone. This kind of temperament caused the immortals to be terrified. Shen Gongbao, your servant is here. Upon hearing Yi Xian's summons, Shen Gongbao hurriedly bowed. How can such a useless person stand in the Celestial Court? Didn't I tell you that if an immortal is incapable, then remove him from his position and let the capable one take over? Yi Xian said in a low voice. It was old Minister Wen's negligence. Celestial Emperor, please punish me. Shen Gongbao's expression changed, and he hurriedly bowed to Yi Xian to beg for forgiveness. Obviously, Yi Xian had told him that people like Grand Preceptor Wen, who did not have high cultivation, but had great influence in the Celestial Court, must be killed. Otherwise, if they caused trouble, it would only cause more trouble for Yi Xian. Today, Grand Preceptor Wen's words seemed to be reasonable, and he even respectfully called Yi Xian Celestial Emperor. He showed his loyalty and courage to Yi Xian. In fact, it was a disguised way to prove to Yi Xian that he was the old minister of the Celestial Court. He wanted to be put in an important position by Yi Xian. However, Grand Preceptor Wen did not understand Yi Xian. He also did not know what kind of person Yi Xian was. In Yi Xian's eyes, no matter who you were, you had to listen to his orders. No one could go against his will. However, Grand Preceptor Wen did not have any ability, and insisted on being loyal to Yi Xian. Naturally, Yi Xian would kill him without any mercy. Yi Xian's action also made some immortals with evil intentions keep quiet out of fear. Who dared to say anything more? Only this time. There will be no next time. Yi Xian would not be too harsh on Shen Gongbao. However, the celestial court was too powerful. There were some things Yi Xian still had to explain clearly. After all, although the immortals of the celestial court were loyal to him, each of them had their own thoughts. Yi Xian did not want to repeat the Jade Emperor's mistakes. On the celestial emperor's throne, Yi Xian looked down at the immortals below. His voice was calm. You are all immortals. Each immortal has their own duties. From today onwards, you do not need to report to me. If you can't even handle such trivial matters, then don't blame me for being merciless. Yes, Celestial Emperor. The immortals bowed and answered. Court dismissed. Venus Taibai swung her horsetail whisk. Yi Xian rose from the Celestial Emperor's throne and returned to the bullfighting palace. Venus Taibai followed closely behind, Fatso Huang and the others even faster. In the bullfighting palace, Yi Xian sat cross-legged in the void. Venus Taibai was slowly reporting some matters of the celestial court. Occasionally, she would look at Fatso Huang and the others with surprise in her eyes. Celestial Emperor. The immortal hermit of the South Pole is a mighty figure of the Chanism. He is also a figure of the third watershed of the grand heavenly realm. I'm afraid that you have destroyed the great void sect in the lower realm. The immortal hermit of the South Pole can no longer sit still. He will soon come to the celestial court to talk to you. Moreover, the immortal hermit of the South Pole must have instructed Neza and his son to leave the celestial court. Please be prepared, Celestial Emperor. If Venus Taibai said in a low voice. Clearly, the Chanism could not sit still and wait for death after Yi Xian ascended to the Celestial Emperor. You can leave now. Yi Xian said calmly, as if he did not care about the immortal hermit of the South Pole. This left Venus Taibai slightly stunned. She did not know how Yi Xian would handle this matter. She bowed and left. However, before she left, she smiled at Fatso Huang and the others. Clearly, she was trying to be friendly. Chapter 517. Bullfighting Palace. The hall had no roof, and stars filled the sky. Boundless starlight sprinkled down, illuminating the entire bullfighting palace with peerless beauty, and added an extremely mysterious color to it. Yi Xian sat on the throne in the center of the bullfighting palace. His expression was very calm, and no one could tell what he was thinking. However, Fatso Huang and the others frowned slightly, and there was hesitation in their eyes. Sir, Fatso Huang bowed. Unfortunately, before he could finish, Yi Xian waved his hand and interrupted him. I know what you want to say. Hearing Yi Xian's words, Fatso Huang and the others looked at each other, and there was a hint of shame and unwillingness in their eyes. You feel that your cultivation is too weak to follow me, right? Yi Xian smiled and directly said what Fatso Huang and the others were thinking. Sir, please teach us how to cultivate. If we don't enter the all-heaven Xian immortal realm, how can we serve you? Fatso Huang knelt on the ground, and so did the others. Everyone looked at Yi Xian with pleading eyes. Whether it was Fatso Huang or Gu Beichen, each of them had their own pride. When they saw the cultivation of the celestial court immortals, a sense of urgency rose in their hearts. Too strong, really too strong. Not to mention the Daluo Jingxian like Shen Gongbao, and the celestial court immortals. Even the ordinary celestial soldiers and celestial generals were celestial immortals. Weak, very weak as ants. This was the definition that Fatso Huang and the others gave themselves. More than 6,000 years had passed, and Yi Xian had long grown into the celestial emperor of the three realms. Even the Daluo Jingxian had to bow down to them, and countless immortals served Yi Xian. On the other hand, Fatso Huang and the others had also discovered a fact. With their current cultivation, they did not have the right to stay by Yi Xian's side at all. This made them feel both unwilling and helpless. Therefore, Fatso Huang and the others all knelt before Yi Xian, hoping that Yi Xian would teach them the immortals' arts, so that they could quickly improve their cultivation. Yi Xian said calmly, The immortal Tao is rugged and full of tribulations. If you are not afraid of death, I will arrange some trials for you. If you can survive 10,000 years later, you will be able to step into the golden immortal realm. Thank you for your guidance, sir. Fatso Huang and the others kowtowed to Yi Xian excitedly. Yi Xian sighed as he looked at the determined eyes of Fatso Huang and the others. After all, these people were once his most loyal subordinates. Although their cultivation was weak now, Yi Xian was the celestial emperor of the three realms. Even if he could use spirit medicine to boost their cultivation, spirit medicine was only an aid in cultivation. It was indispensable for the mental journey and the comprehension of each realm. Before I send you off, I want to tell you in advance that this path is too rugged and cruel. Perhaps only 1/3 of you will survive, or perhaps all of you will die. It's not too late to back out now. I can use the Peach of Immortality Golden Elixir to help you step into the Golden Immortal Realm within 3 years. However, you will forever be stuck in the All-Heaven Realm, Yi Xian said solemnly. He was also telling Fatso Huang and the others that they still had a chance to back out now. Sir, you don't have to say any more. No matter what the path ahead is, we will definitely not let you down. Fatso Huang did not hesitate at all because he knew that as Yi Xian's cultivation increased, the gap between them would also increase. The golden immortal realm of the All-Heaven Realm seemed very tempting, but it was definitely not the end that Fatso Huang and the others wanted to reach. Well then listen to me in detail, because each of you will have a different trial path, Yi Xian said solemnly, and his voice became gloomy. Fatso Huang, your subordinate is here. Fatso Huang bowed, his expression extremely solemn. The Yama underworld, the 18 layers of hell, and the nether blood sea. This is the underworld of the 3 realms of heaven, earth and man, and also the realm with the most complicated forces. I want to annihilate your physical body and turn you into a ghost immortal. From then on, you will no longer be an immortal, but an ordinary ghost immortal of the underworld. Your ultimate task is to become the disciple of the ghost emperors of 5 directions. If you can become the disciple of the Nether River Patriarch, a quasi-saint, then you will have exceeded the requirements of this trial path. Yi Xian narrowed his eyes and spoke in an extremely low voice. Shattering one's immortal body and turning into a ghost immortal was a pain that ordinary people could not endure. His nascent spirit would suffer the pain of 10,000 blades piercing through his heart. However, Fatso Huang was not afraid at all. He nodded solemnly, because Yi Xian's will was the goal of his life. Fatso Huang did not know what Yi Xian wanted to do, but he knew that Yi Xian would not harm him. This made Fatso Huang kowtow 3 times to Yi Xian, to show that he would complete this trial path with a slim chance of survival. Shuejiai, martial uncle, Shuejiai knelt down and looked at Yi Xian with a determined gaze. Although she was only a woman, she had a willpower that did not fear death. Moreover, she had great admiration for her martial uncle. Shuejiai, I will destroy your cultivation and turn you back into a young white fox. Your longevity spirit will also be completely erased. Then, I will send you to the Green Hill Fox clan. Your mission is to burn incense and pray to the Nuwa Palace every day from a young age. No matter how much you suffer in the Green Hill Fox clan, you have to kowtow 3 times to the statue of the Nuwa goddess every day. If you can enter the Nuwa Palace and follow by the side of Saint Nuwa, then you will have completed this trial path. Yi Xian said solemnly, Martial uncle, don't worry. Shuejiai will not let you down. Shuejiai kowtowed 3 times, her eyes filled with determination. Gu Beichen, your subordinate is here. I want you to become a devil immortal. From now on, you will not cultivate the way of immortality, and only cultivate magic. I will also send you to the legendary devil world. This devil world is full of evil spirits and prehistoric monsters. It is a small world created by the devil ancestor Luo Ho. It is filled with endless danger. You will dance with death day and night. If you make a mistake, you will die. Your trial path is to worship the devil ancestor Luo Ho as your master. Yi Xian said in a cold voice. The so-called devil world, although located in the 3 realms, was only a small world. It was like the ancestral land of the sorcerer tribe. However, the devil world was filled with killing. It was very likely that Gu Beichen would die in the devil world before he could see the devil ancestor Luo Ho. Sir, don't worry. Beichen will definitely appear before you alive. Gu Beichen smiled proudly. There was no fear in his eyes, because he was no longer the weak youth. After thousands of years, he also had a heart that was as firm as a rock. Mingyi, your subordinate is here. I want you to become a Buddha. I will send you to the Great Thunderclap Temple in the Western Spirit Mountain. As long as you worship Duo Bao Rilai as your master, you will have completed your trial path. Yes, sir. Mingyi bowed and accepted the order. Ming Heir, I will send you to the Chan sect. Your trial path is to become the third-generation disciple of the Chan sect and worship the South Pole Immortal as your master. Yes, sir. Ming Heir nodded solemnly. Ming-san, your subordinate is here. Chapter 518. On this day, the bullfighting palace was sealed off, and no one could enter. However, there was an extremely terrifying fluctuation coming from the bullfighting palace, and more than 10 groans of pain could be heard. The heavenly soldiers and heavenly generals who passed by the bullfighting palace from time to time looked on in surprise, not knowing what was going on in the bullfighting palace. Rumble! The bullfighting palace rumbled and shook, and an extremely terrifying scene was happening inside. A door to the underworld was opening. Fatso Huang's celestial body collapsed and turned into a ghost immortal, and the yin qi around him evaporated. He solemnly bowed 3 times to Yi Xian and stepped into the door to the underworld without any hesitation. Buzz! The door to the demonic realm opened, and an extremely strong smell of blood drifted out, and a terrifying demonic roar came from the door. Gu Beichen's celestial light was no longer there, and the demonic qi around him evaporated. Even his eyes had turned blood red. Before he left, he bowed to Yi Xian, and a blood-red long saber appeared in his hand. He stepped into the door to the demonic realm. Aya! A young white fox, only the size of a palm, with snow-white fur, was blinking its spiritual eyes as it said something to Yi Xian. Obviously, this was Xue Jie, who had her cultivation destroyed and returned to her original form of a young white fox. Xue Jie, you have a long way to go. Uncle Master doesn't expect you to be Nuwa's disciple. As long as you can enter the Nuwa palace and follow by Nuwa's side, that's enough. Yi Xian sighed and waved his hand to break open the door to the Earth Immortal realm. A beam of celestial light carried the young white fox out, and it instantly headed towards the Green Hill Fox clan in the lower world. Passageways opened one after another, and the people of the underworld bid farewell to Yi Xian one by one. Each of them had their own path of trials, but each person's path and mission were different. Perhaps after they bid farewell to Yi Xian today, they might not see each other again, because Yi Xian didn't know how many of them would survive. After all, the path they had to take was extremely dangerous. If they were to discover their true bodies, then they would definitely end up dead, and their Tao would vanish. Of course, Yi Xian wasn't unprepared. He'd planted an imprint of his primordial spirit on everyone's body. As long as it wasn't a saint spying on them, no one would be able to discover their true bodies. Moreover, Fatso Huang and the others were not from the 3 realms. To begin with, apart from appearing to appear with him in the celestial court, no one in the vast 3 realms knew their identities. Only Primordial Spirit Void Immortal Realm was Immortal Realm, to the Primordial Void Immortal Realm Primordial Spirit Void Immortal Realm, Xian Spirit Immortal Realm Immortal Realm, Primordial Spirit Immortal. Of course, among these people, only Xueji didn't have her primordial spirit implanted, nor was she taught any cultivation method, because she wanted to enter the Nuwa palace. Saint Nuwa's eyes were peerless. If Yi Xian did this, he would be burying his head in the sand, because he wouldn't be able to escape Saint Nuwa's eyes. The passageways were closing one after another. The immortal light around Yi Xian was also dispersing. The entire bullfighting palace became quiet. However, Yi Xian's eyes were as deep as an ancient pond. A strange look flashed across his eyes, plotting against the 3 realms and stirring up chaos. I believe that all of you will be able to complete your own trials, Yi Xian said in a low and sinister voice. A smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. No one knew what his goal was. The king of hell. The water of the yellow springs of the 9 underworlds was flowing, and the cries of dead souls could be heard. This was a dusky sky. There was no sun and moon alternating, and no stars filling the sky. There was only withered desolation, and there was even the surging of a dark light that filled the sky. The vast city gate was brightly colored with blood. In the turbid yellow sky, 3 bloody words were engraved on the city gate. The gates of hell. Legend had it that after passing through the gates of hell, one would arrive at Fengdu Ghost City. There were billions of ghost cultivators there, and there was a supreme figure in the central royal court called Emperor Fengdu. He was the strongest of the 5 ghost emperors. There were countless dead souls and ghost immortals coming from all directions. There were even Oxhead and Horseface leading the dead souls into the gates of hell. There were also black and white impermanents whipping the evil spirits and roaring loudly. Fatso Huang's body was surrounded by ghost fog, and his ghost immortal light was slightly rippling. He raised his head and looked at the 3 words gates of hell. Without any hesitation, he strode into the gates of hell. The devil world. In the dark sky, there was no light at all. Only the screams of demonic creatures and evil spirits could be heard. The air was filled with the smell of blood, and pale white skeletons were scattered all over the boundless land. Gu Beichen's demonic light surged. His eyes were as red as blood, and he held a blood-red saber in his hand. With every slash of his saber, countless evil spirits and demonic creatures died under his saber. He continued to devour the blood and chi of these demonic creatures to strengthen his cultivation. There were countless demonic creatures, and he killed all living things. Although Gu Beichen had turned into a devil immortal, his cultivation was only at the sky immortal realm. It was difficult for him to walk in the devil world, but he still walked towards the center of the devil world with a determined gaze. He believed that the devil ancestor Luo Ho would definitely be in the center of the devil world. Earth immortal realm, ancestral land of the Green Hill Fox clan. Birds chirped and the fragrance of flowers bloomed. Over 10 peerlessly beautiful women were playing in the sea of flowers. And under the rain of flowers that covered the sky, it caused this paradise to become even more magnificent and peerless. Ah! A young white fox was crawling alone in the middle of the sea of flowers. Its pure white fur was full of flower thorns, and small bloodstains appeared on its young body, making it look very pitiful. Sisters, look! When one of the women saw the white fox's infant form, she cried out in surprise, causing the other women of the Green Hill Fox clan to quickly walk towards the white fox. Which sister's descendant is this? Why was it abandoned here so pitifully? A woman with beautiful makeup looked pitiful, and she quickly hugged the white fox. Sister, this child has been injured by the thorns. We should quickly bring it back to the clan for treatment. A young girl said anxiously, and the other women quickly echoed her. The girls were no longer in the mood to fool around. They carried the baby white fox in their arms and returned to the ancestral land. However, none of them noticed that the white fox in their arms glanced at the sky, as if it was looking at someone through the 33 layers of heaven. Ming Yi, Ming Air, Ming 13. A total of 13 members of the underworld appeared among the various powers. Some of them had joined the sect, some of them had killed demons and devils, and some of them had even knelt down. This was because this was their path of trial, and they had to complete the mission that Yi Xian had given them. In the bullfighting palace of the 33 Celestial Court, Yi Xian sat cross-legged in the void, and the light of the stars sprinkled down. His body was surrounded by wisps of dark mist, making him appear mysterious and unfathomable. Peering up into the heavens and looking down into the underworld, Yi Xian's eyes shone through the 3 realms of heaven, earth, and man. He calmly observed the experiences of Fatso Huang and the others. When the dark mist in his eyes dissipated, he regained his calmness. Throughout the ages, the chessboard of heaven and earth, be it Yuan Ling or the saints, no one can control the fate of Yi Xian. This chessboard of heaven and earth has just begun, and we still don't know who is the chess piece and who is the chess player. Yi Xian said in a hoarse voice, and the corner of his mouth curled into a sinister and strange smile. When his eyes opened and closed, a dark mist quietly flashed past. Chapter 519. Who was the master of the untainted world? Ever since Pangu created the world, the untainted world came into being. The first tribulation of the Dragon Han era, the Great War of the Shamans and Demons, the investiture of the gods, and the minor tribulation of the journey to the west. If one were to say that these tribulations were preordained by the heavens, it would be better to say that it was a game between the saints. Everyone below the saints were ants. This was not just a saying, it was something that could not be refuted, because the saints were too terrifying and too unsolvable. The life level of the saints was not something that the immortals could fathom, just like how mortals could not stand shoulder to shoulder with the immortals. This was the same logic. Yi Xian knew that the saints were very terrifying, not to mention the Hongjun Dao ancestor who had fused with the Dao. However, Yi Xian was very clear about one thing. Although the saints seemed unsolvable, there were definitely secrets related to this world. The mysterious Yuanling's plan even involved the saints. It was probably extremely terrifying. Although Yi Xian did not know Yuanling's identity, it did not matter because he knew that Yuanling had always wanted to seize his physical body, and even wanted to take the heaven-destroying halberd and the forbidden chapter of the undying immortal scripture for himself. This clearly had an inseparable relationship with his plan. Yi Xian could also infer that the undying immortal scripture and the heaven-destroying halberd were the variables. This was also a double-edged sword in his hand that could be used to suppress Yuanling. It was also the foundation of his standing in the three realms. Yuanling was planning step by step and setting up a chessboard of heaven and earth. The saints were even more superior and had their own thoughts. Yi Xian naturally would not sit still and wait for death. He was now the Sky Emperor, and was known as the master of the three realms in name. This was only his starting point, and not his ending point. Yi Xian wanted to use the Sky Emperor as the starting point, and bury the chess pieces in this chessboard of heaven and earth one by one. In the end, whether it was Yuanling or these saints, it was still unknown who would win this chessboard of heaven and earth. Unfilial son. Save me, Sky Emperor. Suddenly, two strange voices came from outside the bullfighting palace. This also made Yi Xian return from his thoughts. A look of understanding flashed across his eyes. Buzz! A demonic light shot out from outside the bullfighting palace, and instantly hid behind Yi Xian. It was also at this moment that Mahamayuri crossed through the air, and arrived with a face filled with rage. Brother Yi, this unfilial son has lost all face for me, Kong Xian. Don't protect him today. Kong Xian was furious. He looked at the person behind Yi Xian with a hateful expression. The Heavenly Rock King. Yi Xian heaven golden immortal. And since he golden immortal peach of heaven, he was immortal heavenly immortal. Immortal was immortal. Immortal. Of the immortal. To the two immortal. To the immortal. The. However, this was not the most important issue. The most important issue was mentioned before. This Heavenly Rock King's biological father was Kong Xian, and he was also the child of Kong Xian, and a human woman. Originally, when Kong Xian came to the celestial court to meet with Yi Xian, he should have left the celestial court long ago. However, coincidentally, Kong Xian discovered traces of the Heavenly Rock King. This caused Kong Xian to stay in the celestial court for hundreds of years. Originally, Kong Xian thought that Heavenly Rock King would personally visit his father. But what infuriated Kong Xian was that Heavenly Rock King knew that Kong Xian was in the celestial court and immediately hid. He had no intention of meeting Kong Xian. Several hundred years later, Kong Xian finally could not sit still any longer. With his cultivation at the third watershed of the Grand Heavenly Realm, it was extremely easy for him to find the Heavenly Peng King, which was why this scene happened. The Heavenly Peng King glanced at Kong Xian fearfully, and hurriedly asked Yi Xian for help. Celestial Emperor. Kong Xian wants to take me back to the Aparagodania continent. Please save me, Celestial Emperor. Unfilial son, I'll kill you. Kong Xian's face turned ashen when he heard the Heavenly Peng King's words. This unfilial son actually dared to call him by his name in front of Yi Xian, without acknowledging him as his father. How could Kong Xian not be furious? The grand heavenly immortal radiance surged with the laws of space and time, causing the surrounding space to distort. Kong Xian really did look like he wanted to kill the Heavenly Peng King. Brother Kong, please calm your anger. Yi Xian smiled helplessly. As the saying went, even an upright official would find it difficult to resolve a family dispute. Although he already knew about the relationship between Kong Xian and the heavenly Peng King, and also knew that the father and son must have some unknown conflict, it was clearly very difficult for him to deal with this matter. As the saying went, both sides were flesh and blood. The heavenly Peng King was his subordinate, and Kong Xian stood with him. It would not be good for him to side with either of them. However, the father and son had already caused a ruckus in front of him. He could not just ignore it. With Yi Xian's persuasion, Kong Xian had to give him face. Moreover, the heavenly Peng King was his own son. So how could he really kill the heavenly Peng King? The grand heavenly immortal radiance slowly dissipated. Kong Xian suppressed his fury and said, "Brother Yi, you don't know. This unfilial son descended to the lower realms as a demon. Over the past 100,000 years, not only has his cultivation been unbearably low, he has also committed all sorts of evil. If it were not for the fact that I, Kong Xian, still have some reputation in the three realms, making some immortals and demons apprehensive, just the things he has done would have killed him countless times. Kong Xian, don't boast shamelessly. I've never told anyone that I'm your son. I'm a heavenly Peng, not a five-colored peacock. I don't need the protection of your name," the heavenly Peng King retorted. However, he still felt great fear towards Kong Xian. Unfilial son. Kong Xian had always had a violent temper, and he was even more lawless in the three realms. How could he show his face when his own son talked back to him, especially in front of Yi Xian? Rumble. Kong Xian struck out with his palm, causing the void to collapse violently. He directly attacked the heavenly Peng King, causing the heavenly Peng King's face to turn pale. He immediately hid behind Yi Xian. Buzz! Yi Xian's palm swept through the air, instantly dispersing Kong Xian's attack. If Big Brother Kong trusts me, then retreat for now. I want to have a chat with the heavenly Peng King, Yi Xian said with a smile. Brother Yi, this unfilial son. Before Kong Xian could finish, Yi Xian interrupted. How can there be such a deep grudge between father and son? Big Brother Kong, don't be impatient. Just retreat for now. Hearing Yi Xian's words, Kong Xian glared hatefully at the heavenly Peng King, then turned and walked out of the bullfighting palace. This allowed the heavenly Peng King to finally breathe a sigh of relief. Thank you, heavenly emperor. If you weren't here, Kong Xian would have definitely killed me. The heavenly Peng King bowed towards Yi Xian. Looking at the heavenly Peng King's pale face, Yi Xian smiled faintly and said, There's no overnight grudge between father and son. Why would Big Brother Kong really want to kill you? If he really wanted to kill you, you would have died countless times already. The heavenly Peng King was immediately speechless when he heard Yi Xian's words. In fact, how could he not know that Kong Xian wanted to kill him? There was no way he could avoid it. However, the heavenly Peng King still felt great discord and resentment towards his father. Chapter 520. Come tell me, why are you so hostile towards your father? Yi Xian calmly asked. The heavenly Peng King's expression changed when he mentioned his relationship with Kong Xian. He became somewhat silent. After several dozen breaths, the heavenly Peng King finally spoke, and told him about the conflict between the father and son that could not be resolved. The story started from 150,000 years ago. Kong Xian was the first five-colored peacock since the creation of the world. His innate ability, the five-colored divine light, shook the three realms. He was also a revered figure in the three realms. Such a supreme figure actually turned into a mortal and fell in love with a human woman in the earth immortal realm. This was also the birth of the heavenly Peng King. Kong Xian's true form was a five-colored peacock and possessed supreme magic power. The woman he fell in love with was only immortal, although their union was not heaven-defying. When the woman gave birth to the heavenly Peng King, her soul also dispersed and disappeared from the world. The death of the heavenly Peng King's mother made Kong Xian extremely sad. Even though he was a figure at the third watershed of the grand heavenly immortal realm, he could not revive his wife. Thus, he vented all his resentment on the heavenly Peng King. As everyone knew, the five-colored peacock race was born from the world. They were not descendants. Although the heavenly Peng King had Kong Xian's bloodline, his true form was a golden-winged Peng. Although his innate ability was extremely terrifying, he was still several levels weaker than the five-colored peacock race. This made Kong Xian feel even more humiliated. In the heavenly Peng King's memories, he had never seen his mother since he was young. He even found out that his mother died because of him from Kong Xian's scolding. This became the biggest shadow in his heart. Strict scolding and scolding from a young age. This was the heavenly Peng King's impression of Kong Xian. He had never felt the so-called fatherly love, and had to suffer Kong Xian's whipping from time to time. This made him extremely resentful towards Kong Xian. After the heavenly Peng King stepped into the grand celestial realm, he finally found an opportunity to leave the Aparagodania continent. After a series of escape, he entered the mountain of flowers and fruit, and became a demon king. After hearing the heavenly Peng King's account, Yi Xian shook his head helplessly. What you're saying is that your father blames you for your mother's death, and hates that you're a heavenly Peng instead of a five-colored peacock, causing him to lose a lot of face. He wants nothing more than to kill you? Yi Xian said softly. Heavenly Emperor, you saw it too. He didn't kill me because he was afraid that others would say that he killed his son mercilessly. I, heavenly Peng King, don't have a father like him. He has never treated me as his son. Heavenly Peng King said coldly. All right, since that's the case, this emperor has nothing else to say. However, this emperor wants to make a bet with you. Let's see if your father really wants you dead. I wonder if you dare to make a bet with this emperor? Yi Xian said. What kind of bet? Heavenly Peng King was slightly startled. Half a day later, when Kong Xian entered the bullfighting palace again, Yi Xian had his hands behind his back while Heavenly Peng King stood to the side. This also made Kong Xian glare fiercely at Heavenly Peng King. Clearly, his anger had not subsided. Brother Yi, I want to bring this unfilial son back to the Aparagodania continent and imprison him forever. I hope Brother Yi can fulfill my wish, Kong Xian said bluntly. Brother Kong, I already understand the matter between you and your father. Since you hate him so much and are worried that others will say that you killed your son mercilessly, then let me be the villain, Yi Xian said with a smile. Hearing Yi Xian's words, Kong Xian frowned slightly and asked in confusion. Brother Yi, what do you mean? Brother Kong is a five-colored peacock, and while Heavenly Peng King is of your bloodline, his true form is only a golden-winged Peng. This is an enormous humiliation to you, so let me clean up your house for you. This way, you won't be mocked by others. When Yi Xian's words entered his ears, Kong Xian was taken aback. He did not understand the meaning behind Yi Xian's words, but at this moment, Yi Xian unleashed an extremely terrifying aura. As his palm rose and fell, it shot toward Heavenly Peng King with frightening killing intent. Rumble! Space collapsed and spacetime was thrown into chaos. Yi Xian did not hold back at all in this attack, displaying a power that could slay immortals and gods. As long as this attack landed on Heavenly Peng King, it would definitely obliterate his soul. Such a scene caused Kong Xian's expression to greatly change. Without giving Kong Xian any time to think, the Zenith Heaven Immortal light surged out. His palm was like a heavenly river that directly smashed towards Yi Xian, and his entire body blocked in front of the Heavenly Peng King. Bang! The bullfighting palace trembled violently. The two individuals' attacks were too resplendent and terrifying, but it allowed Heavenly Peng King's life to be preserved. Brother Yi, what are you doing? Kong Xian's face turned cold, and his voice became somewhat gloomy. Kong Xian, since Heavenly Peng King killed his mother, and his true form is not a five-colored peacock, he is only a disgrace to you. Wouldn't it be more to your liking if this emperor killed him? Yi Xian smiled. He did not give Kong Xian any time to think. He took a step forward, and suddenly appeared in front of Heavenly Peng King. He pointed at Heavenly Peng King's forehead, clearly wanting to shatter his origin spirit. You dare? Kong Xian was furious. He turned his palm and slapped at Yi Xian, blocking Heavenly Peng King behind him again. Kong Xian, no one can stop the people this emperor wants to kill. Yi Xian smiled cruelly. He formed an immortal seal with both hands and disappeared into the void. He charged at Heavenly Peng King with boundless killing intent. Bang! 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 The world exploded, and the void collapsed. Kang Xian's face was cold as he instantly fought with Yi Xian. However, Yi Xian did not want to be entangled with Kang Xian. Instead, he attacked Heavenly Peng King with all sorts of killing techniques. This distracted Kang Xian, who had to take care of Heavenly Peng King, instantly falling into a disadvantageous position. Die! Bang! Yi Xian struck out with his palm. Without waiting for Kang Xian's rescue, the Heavenly Peng King's body was instantly shattered by Yi Xian's attack. At this moment, his primordial spirit turned into specks of golden light. Such a scene stunned Kang Xian. However, his eyes turned crimson red. An extremely terrifying five-colored divine light rolled out, causing the 33 layers of the celestial court to rumble. Killing intent, anger, and boundless hatred. This was Kang Xian's current state. Yi Xian, you bastard! Return my son's life. Anger and murderous intent soared to the heavens. There was even a piercing cry. The five-colored divine light around Kang Xian burst out. He actually turned into the true form of the five-colored peacock. The burning five-colored holy light caused the surrounding world to begin to collapse. Even the bullfighting palace was cracking inch by inch. If it were not for the protection of the great protective matrix of the 33 layers of celestial court, the bullfighting palace would have been reduced to ashes in an instant. After Kang Xian transformed into a five-colored peacock, the five-colored divine light that swept through everything was too terrifying. When the five-colored divine light merged into one, even Yi Xian's heart tightened slightly. An extremely grave expression appeared in his eyes. Father! Suddenly, without waiting for Kang Xian to make a move, a mournful voice came from behind him. This also caused Kang Xian to stop breathing. He abruptly looked behind him, and saw Heavenly Peng King standing in front of him unscathed. There was not a single wound on his body, let alone his soul. Buzz! The five-colored divine light dissipated. Kang Xian stared blankly at Heavenly Peng King. Then, he suddenly turned to Yi Xian with an extremely bitter expression. Brother Yi, I didn't think that you would actually toy with me like this. Heavenly Peng, are you still saying that your father wished for nothing more than for you to die? You did not hesitate to fight to the death with this emperor for you. He even transformed into his true form of a five-colored peacock. Yi Xian smiled at Heavenly Peng King. This also caused Heavenly Peng King to bite his lips and directly kneel behind Kang Xian. Tears flowed uncontrollably from his eyes. Fun filial son. Kang Xian suddenly understood everything when Heavenly Peng King appeared before him alive. However, he was extremely concerned about his face, so he pretended to be angry and reprimanded Heavenly Peng King. Father, I was wrong. Heavenly Peng King kowtowed. His voice was choked with sobs, as if he was a child who had done something wrong. He did not dare to look at Kang Xian's eyes. There is no overnight enmity between father and son. You two should have a good talk. Yi Xian smiled. He knew that he should give the father and son some privacy, so he turned around and walked out of the bullfighting palace. In fact, Yi Xian only wanted to resolve the estrangement between the father and son. His true goal was for Kang Xian to owe him a favor. Although the power of the 33rd Celestial Court had greatly increased, only Yi Xian could match the third boundary of the Grand Heavenly Immortal Realm. Regardless of whether it was the underworld or the Western Sacred Mountain, there were several terrifying figures at the third boundary of the Grand Heavenly Immortal Realm. Today Kang Xian and his father had reunited. Kang Xian would definitely be extremely grateful to him. Yi Xian wanted to pull Kang Xian into the Celestial Court. This was his true goal. Perhaps some people would say that Yi Xian was unfathomable, but for Yi Xian, when he ascended to the position of Celestial Emperor, he needed someone who could hold up half the sky by his side. Kang Xian was the best candidate in his mind. This had nothing to do with benevolence and morality, nor did it have anything to do with scheming. It was because these were things that Yi Xian had to do, and it was even more related to whether or not he, Yi Xian, could stand firm in the three realms. Kang Xian was the first five-colored peacock in the world. If Yi Xian could obtain his help, it would be a great bargaining chip for Yi Xian in this game of chess. Chapter 521. Kang Xian and his son chatted for a long time. Yi Xian did not know what they talked about. But when Yi Xian returned to the bullfighting palace, he saw that the father and son were full of smiles. They were no longer glaring at each other angrily. "Brother Yi, I can't thank you enough." Kong Xian cupped his fists and bowed. His words were extremely sincere. "Brother Kong, there's no need to be so polite. The Heavenly Peng King has always followed me. It's also a good thing that you and your son can reconcile." Yi Xian paused for a moment. When he waved his hand in the air, a golden pill appeared, and he threw it at Kong Xian. "This is the Great Marrow Cleansing Pill. It can purify the bloodline and improve one's aptitude. Consider this a gift from me to Brother Kong," Yi Xian said with a smile. "The Great Marrow Cleansing Pill?" Kong Xian was slightly stunned. His eyes suddenly lit up. He looked at Yi Xian with a touch of gratitude. The Great Marrow Cleansing Pill. It was an extremely precious immortal pill in the Tishita Palace. Only the mysterious Grand Supreme Elderly Lord could refine it. Kong Xian had only heard of this pill, but had never seen it before. Of course, although the Great Marrow Cleansing Pill was extremely precious, it was not very useful to Kong Xian. However, this pill was extremely useful to the Heavenly Peng King. The Heavenly Peng King originally had the bloodline of the five-colored peacock. However, the five-colored peacock was born from the world. Even though the Heavenly Peng King was Kong Xian's son, his original form was only a golden-winged Great Peng. Now that Yi Xian had given him this Great Marrow Cleansing Pill, it could completely purify the Heavenly Peng King's bloodline. Perhaps it would not be impossible for the Heavenly Peng King to shed the golden-winged Great Peng King's original form and become a five-colored peacock. Such a precious immortal pill naturally made Kong Xian value it greatly. He felt even more grateful to Yi Xian in his heart. However, Kong Xian was not a pretentious person. He did not put on any pretense and directly accepted the immortal pill from Yi Xian. However, he remembered this favor in his heart. "Brother Yi, I, Kong Xian, won't say too much. Once I help this unfilial son transform into a five-colored peacock, I and my father will definitely return to the celestial court and lend Brother Yi a hand," Kong Xian said solemnly. "Big brother, there's no need to be so courteous. No matter what, you and I will always be brothers. There's no need to be so formal." Yi Xian smiled. Good. Farewell today, we'll meet again in the future." Kong Xian heartily laughed. He no longer acted courteously with Yi Xian. The origin immortal light surged out as he brought the Heavenly Peng King down to the lower realm in a scarlet beam of light. Yi Xian smiled faintly as he watched the father and son leave. He knew that from today onwards, Kong Xian would truly be of use to him. This would be a great help to him. A worthy younger brother. Suddenly a flowing ray of light shot over. Imperial Monarch Ziwei appeared by Yi Xian's side, and there was even a wisp of excitement on her face. Yi Xian was slightly stunned as he gazed at the excited expression on Imperial Monarch Ziwei's face, and he said, "May I know why Big Brother is so excited?" "A worthy younger brother, look what this is." Imperial Monarch Ziwei chuckled, and directly passed a golden invitation to Yi Xian. This allowed Yi Xian to take it and flip through it. After an entire 10 breaths of time, Yi Xian finally closed the golden invitation, and a wisp of a deep expression flashed through his eyes when he opened and closed them. "An earthly immortal ancestor, a Tao discussion?" Yi Xian muttered. "Haha." Imperial Monarch Ziwei roared with laughter and said, "A worthy younger brother. Looks like this master of mine thinks extremely highly of you. You must know that even though this Tao discussion can't compare to the ginseng fruit meeting, it's held once every 10,000 years, and it's personally taught by my master, the Grand Immortal Zhen Yuan. This time, my master actually sent someone to deliver an invitation to you. This shows that my master thinks extremely highly of you. You must grasp this opportunity well." Yi Xian nodded lightly when he heard Imperial Monarch Ziwei, and then he said, "May I know when this Tao discussion will be held, and who will be participating?" "A worthy younger brother, listen to me slowly." Imperial Monarch Ziwei spoke excitedly, and quickly told Yi Xian about the Tao discussion, and this caused Yi Xian to nod with a grin. However, a wisp of contemplation flashed through his eyes from time to time. The so-called Tao discussion was a grand event where the grand immortal Jin Yuan of the five-manner temple passed down the Tao. All those that were able to listen to the Tao were people like Daoyuo Jingxian, and there were even many figures that were at the third watershed. The earthly immortal ancestor, the grand immortal Jin Yuan, was a figure at the quasi-saint realm, and he was a figure that was highly respected in the three dimensions. So how could his teachings be ordinary? It was also because of this Tao discussion that was held once every 10,000 years, that the grand immortal Jin Yuan was extremely respected in the earthly immortal dimension, whereas there were very few people that were able to be personally invited by him, and this represented an extremely great honor. The netherworld, Taoism, Buddhism, Tongtian, Greater Demon King Tongtian, and even quasi-saint disciples. This Tao discussion could be said to be all-encompassing, and it was absolutely not something that the Grand Immortal Peach Banquet, held by the Jade Emperor and Queen Mother, could compare to. A quasi-saint's Tao discussion was a fortuitous encounter for the Tongtian. Throughout the three dimensions, there were no quasi-saints, and only the earthly immortal ancestor, Grand Immortal Jin Yuan, was benevolent and beneficial to the three dimensions. The Tao discussion would be held 10 years from now. At that time, the five-manner temple would be bustling to the extreme, and countless existences at the peak of the golden immortal realm would appear in the five-manner temple. After he sent off imperial monarch Ziwei, Yi Xian stood alone in bullfighting palace. However, the smile on his face gradually vanished, and his brows even knit together slightly, while a wisp of a heavy expression flashed through his eyes. As the saying went, there was no love without a reason, and there was no hatred without a reason. Yi Xian had always believed in this sentence. The earthly immortal ancestor, Grand Immortal Jin Yuan, was a quasi-saint figure. It could be said that he was invincible among quasi-saints. Even though Yi Xian was the celestial emperor of the three dimensions, in the eyes of these quasi-saints, he was no different from other immortals. Yi Xian would not believe that the Grand Immortal Jin Yuan took care of him for the sake of imperial monarch Ziwei. It should be known that supreme figures like the quasi-saints were already extremely indifferent to their 7 emotions and 6 desires. Only the heavenly Tao saint was their only goal, and Yi Xian was merely Daoyuo Jingxian. How could he be in the eyes of the Grand Immortal Jin Yuan? Unfortunately, no matter how Yi Xian thought about it, he could not understand why this earthly immortal ancestor valued him so much. However, Yi Xian was an extremely suspicious person and did not trust anyone, but he could not figure out the reason. When he ascended to the position of celestial emperor, the Grand Immortal Jin Yuan sent someone to send him a ginseng fruit. This could be said to be an extremely precious gift. This time, the Grand Immortal Jin Yuan personally sent an invitation to the Tao discussion. If there was no motive behind this, Yi Xian would not believe it. At this moment, Yi Xian's cultivation was still at the 3rd heavenly layer of the Grand Immortal Realm. Even after consuming the ginseng fruit and 3 blood god fruits, he did not show any signs of breaking through to the 4th heavenly layer. It was as if there was an unbreakable barrier in front of him. Even a myriad of spiritual medicine like the ginseng fruit could not help him break through to the 2nd Grand Immortal Realm. Perhaps I'm overthinking it. Yi Xian laughed at himself. He was too suspicious. What if the Grand Immortal Jin Yuan valued him more, because of imperial monarch Ziwei? I wonder if the quasi-saints Tao discussion can help me break through to the 4th heavenly layer of the Grand Immortal Realm. Yi Xian muttered to himself, and dispelled the bad thoughts in his heart. Chapter 522. 10 years passed in the blink of an eye like a dream. When the gates of Bullfighting Palace slowly opened, Yi Xian and Emperor Ziwei walked out together. 9 golden dragons pulled the celestial emperor's chariot and stood in the void. When Yi Xian and Emperor Ziwei stepped onto the chariot, the celestial emperor's chariot rushed towards the Earth Immortal Realm. The Earth Immortal Realm was divided into 4 continents and 4 oceans, also known as the 4 poles of heaven and earth. There were also legends of the ends of the earth and Mount Buzhou. It was said that at the ends of the 4 continents, there were 4 sacred beasts that suppressed the 4 poles of heaven and earth, and supported the entire 3 realms. The 4 sacred beasts were the Eastern Azure Dragon, the Western White Tiger, the southern vermilion bird, and the northern black tortoise. The 4 sacred beasts didn't appear in the world, but it was said that their cultivation wasn't inferior to that of a quasi-saint. However, legends were legends after all, and it was hard to tell the truth from the lies. Not to mention the vastness of the 3 realms, the ancestor of the Earth Immortals, Great Immortal Zhenyuan's 5-manor monastery, was located in the Aparagodania continent, which was also the origin of the Western Sacred Mountain. Everyone knew that Great Immortal Zhenyuan was the ancestor of the Earth Immortals, and an immortal of the 10,000 immortals. He cultivated the Khanate Taoist divine arts. Although he didn't belong to the 3 pure ones, he formed his own Tao, and was also a Taoist divine arts practitioner. His decision to set up his Tao temple in the Aparagodania continent was somewhat difficult to understand, and made many people daydream. After all, the 2 saints of the West founded Sacred Mountains Buddhism, and everyone in the Aparagodania continent believed in Buddhism. There was no place for Taoism to survive, but Great Immortal Zhenyuan set up his Tao temple in the Aparagodania continent. Was he not afraid of offending Sacred Mountain of the West? Of course, this question had never been answered, and no one knew what Great Immortal Zhenyuan was thinking. However, it didn't matter, because endless time had passed. Great Immortal Zhenyuan and Sacred Mountain of the West had always coexisted peacefully. As time passed, the various divine arts practitioners of the 3 realms no longer paid attention to this question. Aparagodania continent Longevity Mountain. There was a continuous chain of mountains, with giant peaks reaching into the clouds. Ancient pine trees were thousands of meters tall, and countless spirit birds and beasts were galloping through the forest. Cranes were circling the mountains, and the spiritual energy that filled the sky and earth made the entire Longevity Mountain look like a paradise. A Taoist temple stood halfway up the mountain. It had an ancient wooden door and slightly modeled walls. On both sides of the door, there were 2 ancient pine trees rooted here. The green branches and leaves appeared green under the reflection of the sun. Golden words of the 3-manor monastery, of the 3 manors of temples of Tao temples Tao. If a mortal came here, he would not believe that there was a sage to be hidden in this ordinary Taoist temple, nor would he believe that the 5th manor was a holy land that even Zenith Heaven Golden Immortals had to respect. The wooden door of the 5 villages temple opened with a rumble, and there was even the sound of Tao from the 9 heavens. Auspicious Qi was rising, and celestial light was surging. 2 celestial children, Qing Feng and Mingyu, walked out of the 5 villages temple until the 2 celestial children stood on both sides of the door, quietly waiting for the arrival of guests from all over. Heaven and earth were filled with 9 different colors. It was unknown how many powerful cultivators were flying over on clouds. However, no matter how terrifying their identities were, when they arrived at the outskirts of 10,000 Years Mountain, they all retracted their divine abilities and landed outside the mountain gate. Great Immortal Zhenyuan, the ancestor of Earth Immortals, was a quasi-saint. When the various divine arts came to his Tao temple, they naturally had to respect him. They could only follow the rugged mountain path towards the 5th manor with reverence. This was also their respect for Great Immortal Zhenyuan. In the eastern firmament, 9 golden dragons roared through the firmament. Yi Xian sat cross-legged in the celestial emperor's dermic chariot. He did not wear his imperial robes, only his black robes. Emperor Ziwei accompanied him by his side. She was slowly explaining the situation of the Longevity Mountain to Yi Xian. A worthy younger brother, the Longevity Mountain is a divine mountain of the primordial era. My master, Great Immortal Zhenyuan, has long since refined it into an extremely powerful spirit treasure. The mountain can be big or small. It can be said to be a world of its own. In my master's hands, it has unimaginable power. Emperor Ziwei excitedly introduced the origins of the Longevity Mountain. Yi Xian listened quietly. Although Yi Xian was listening to Empress Myrtle Star's narration, his pair of Dharma eyes were looking in all directions, and the various supreme experts were all reflected in his eyes. Powerful, very powerful. All the immortals and demons that appeared in the Longevity Mountain were terrifyingly powerful. This was what Yi Xian felt at this moment. A black bull that was 20 feet tall. Although his aura was not obvious, When the demonic light around him rippled, the surrounding space and time were collapsing. His cultivation was at least at the second watershed of the grand heavenly realm. A figure shrouded in dark fog. He was clearly of the ghost cultivator lineage. He should belong to the underworld. His cultivation was actually at the third watershed of the grand heavenly realm. However, although this person was at the third watershed of the grand heavenly realm, Yi Xian's senses were extremely sensitive. He was still far from a peak grand heavenly realm existence like Kong Xian. Of course, to be able to step into the third watershed of the grand heavenly realm, such a person would be revered as an ancestor in the three realms. He would probably be an extremely terrifying existence in the underworld, an immortal shrouded in watery light. Gentle immortal light rippled slightly. He looked like a youth, but his hair was snow white. His gaze was extremely sharp. His cultivation was at the peak of the second watershed of the grand heavenly realm. He was only a step away from the third watershed of the grand heavenly realm. Yi Xian narrowed his eyes. He was constantly examining these great beings. Although there were not many people with cultivation like these three, there were still quite a number of them. There were even a few who concealed their auras. If Yi Xian guessed correctly, these people were definitely at the third watershed of the grand heavenly realm. Yi Xian estimated that there were no immortals, demons, or demons below the grand heavenly realm walking around the Longevity Mountain. There were more than 1,000 of them. Among them, there were around 30 people at the second watershed of the grand heavenly realm. There were 5 who were suspected to be at the third watershed. The name of a quasi-saint is indeed terrifying. Yi Xian retracted his gaze and muttered to himself. It was merely a Dao discussion held by the grand immortal Zhen Yuan. But so many grand heavenly realm had gathered. Just this rallying power alone was enough to prove how terrifying a quasi-saint was. Of course, 1,000 Daoyuo Jingxian might seem like a lot, but it was only a small group in the entire three realms. After all, the three realms was too vast. The arrival of 1,000 Daoyuo Jingxian was only because of the name of the grand immortal Zhen Yuan. Yi Xian did not pay much attention to these Daoyuo Jingxian. What he was truly concerned about were the 5 terrifying figures at the third watershed. If I can devour one of them, I will definitely be able to break through to the second watershed of the grand heavenly realm. Yi Xian narrowed his eyes. His voice was as soft as a mosquito. A fierce light quietly flashed through his eyes. The Calamity Transcender technique. This was one of Yi Xian's trump cards. When he stepped into the Daoyuo Jingxian, the Calamity Transcender technique could be said to have contributed greatly. However, ever since he became a celestial emperor, even if he devoured ordinary Daoyuo Jingxian, it would not increase his cultivation by much. However, the figures at the third watershed were different. Yi Xian was very confident that if he could devour a Daoyuo Jingxian at the third watershed, his cultivation would increase exponentially. Chapter 523. Of course, the third zenith heavenly realm wasn't that easy to kill. Even if Yi Xian had a heaven-defying technique like the Tribulation Transcender transformation, he couldn't guarantee that he could kill such a character. Moreover, the third zenith heavenly realm was also divided into different levels. From the 7th firmament to the 9th firmament, the difference between each firmament was huge. If he could devour such a character, only Yi Xian, who was at the 7th firmament of zenith heavenly realm, had some confidence. Of course, this was Yi Xian's own idea. It wasn't that simple to put it into action. Rumble. The celestial emperor's chariot was too dazzling, and Yi Xian's arrival naturally attracted attention from all directions. It was all because Yi Xian's reputation was too resounding, which naturally attracted the attention of all almighty figures. Yi Xian took a step forward and slowly walked out of the celestial emperor's chariot. Emperor Ziwei walked side by side with him, and also appeared on the rugged mountain path. Haha! Suddenly, a burst of loud laughter sounded out as 2 Taoists walked towards Yi Xian. Although they didn't reveal any auras, just based on their auras, they were able to determine that the 2 of them were existences at the second watershed of the golden immortal realm. And this wasn't the most important thing. The most important thing was that these 2 weren't immortals, but people of the underworld. They also cultivated the ghost immortal lineage. The two freaks of Mount Mang? Emperor Ziwei frowned. A worthy younger brother. These two are ghost kings of the underworld. They have extremely terrifying ghost Dao divine abilities. You have to be careful. Emperor Ziwei secretly transmitted her voice to Yi Xian. Hearing Emperor Ziwei's words, Yi Xian smiled slightly and looked at the two with a strange gaze. One had to know that since he entered the Earth Immortal realm, he had only been in contact with the mortals and demons. It could be said that he knew very little about the ghost immortal lineage. This was also because the ghost immortals were basically in the underworld and rarely appeared in the Earth Immortal realm. If Grand Immortal Zhen Yuan hadn't held a Dao discussion today, Yi Xian might not have been able to come into contact with someone like Ghost Immortal. I've long heard that the Celestial Court has a new owner. Us two brothers have always admired Yi Tiandi. Now that we've met him today, he truly lives up to his reputation. The two freaks of Mount Mang laughed heartily as they cupped their hands and greeted Yi Xian. Unfortunately, Yi Xian only nodded at their greetings and continued to walk along the rugged mountain path towards the fifth manor. This also made the two freaks of Mount Mang slightly change their expressions, and a trace of dissatisfaction flashed across their eyes. However, the two of them didn't say anything. After all, Yi Xian was the Celestial Emperor, and he wasn't someone they could afford to offend. Moreover, the two of them had long heard of Yi Xian's legend. They knew that Yi Xian wasn't a kind person. Fellow Taoist Ziwei, I haven't seen you for many years. You're already at the third heaven of Zenith Heaven. Perhaps after Senior Zhen Yuan's lecture, fellow Taoist Ziwei will be able to break through to the second heaven of Zenith Heaven. A middle-aged Taoist came from the foot of the mountain. He first smiled and nodded at Yi Xian before greeting Emperor Ziwei. This person was called Immortal Golden Light. His cultivation was at the second heaven of Zenith Heaven. He lived in seclusion in Golden Light Cave all year round, and was also a good friend of Emperor Ziwei for many years. Haha, I guess that you would definitely appear today. Emperor Ziwei smiled when she saw her old friend, and started chatting with Immortal Golden Light. This is Yi Tiandi. I'm sure you've already heard of him. Emperor Ziwei pulled Immortal Golden Light over to Yi Xian, and introduced him to Yi Xian. A worthy younger brother, let me introduce you. This is the master of Golden Light Cave. His Taoist name is Immortal Golden Light. He's also a good friend of mine for many years. Fellow Taoist Golden Light. Yi Xian smiled and gave a fist salute. Immortal Golden Light hurriedly avoided it, and then bowed to Yi Xian, saying, How can I accept the Celestial Emperor's salute? If there's anything you need me for, just let me know. I'll definitely do my best to help. The Golden Light Immortal lowered his status to the extreme. It was obvious that he didn't treat Yi Xian as an equal just because of his relationship with Empress Myrtle Star. From this, it could be seen that the Golden Light Immortal was extremely intelligent, and was also a smooth and slick character. Let's go. The Dao discussion is about to begin. Let's hurry over, and not miss the opportunity. Empress Myrtle Star lightly smiled as she hurriedly called Yi Xian, and the other two towards the fifth manor. The three of them walked together towards fifth manor. Along the way, there were powerful people coming from all directions. Many immortals and demons also greeted Emperor Ziwei. However, everyone's eyes were focused on Yi Xian. This was because they all knew that Yi Xian was the new Celestial Emperor. Naturally, they were extremely curious about Yi Xian. Some nodded and smiled at Yi Xian, while others looked at Yi Xian from head to toe. There was even a hint of enmity in the depths of their eyes. However, no matter what, no one dared to cause trouble in Longevity Mountain. No one dared to provoke Yi Xian. This was the Sage-to-Be's training ground. Anyone who dared to cause trouble here was disrespectful to the Sage-to-Be. Amitabha. Suddenly a Buddhist chant rang out. A ring of Buddhist light bloomed on the mountain path. The voice headed straight for Yi Xian. This also made Yi Xian look towards the source of the voice. He also saw a familiar face. Duoba Rulai, the master of the Western Spiritual Mountain, an existence at the peak of the Grand Heavenly Realm. Yi Xian had never imagined that Duoba Rulai would actually participate in this sparring session, and even appear in Longevity Mountain. So it's Yi Tiandi. No wonder there's such a huge commotion. Duo Bao Rilai smiled faintly, but his gaze towards Yi Xian was filled with great enmity. Clearly, Duo Bao Rilai had not forgotten the humiliation Yi Xian had inflicted on him. Yi Xian strolled forward until he arrived beside Duo Bao Rilai. He looked at him with slight contempt. I was wondering who it was. So it's old man Duo Bao. Instead of meditating on the spiritual mountain, you came to Longevity Mountain. Aren't you afraid that demons will attack the spiritual mountain and cause your Western Buddhist orthodoxy to vanish? Humph. Duo Bao Rilai snorted coldly. Which demon is bold enough to attack the spiritual mountain? If there's anyone who wants to destroy the orthodoxy of the spiritual mountain, it's probably only you, Yi Tiandi. The two of them were at loggerheads with each other. A heavy smell of gunpowder grew between the two of them. This also made the various experts look at them. They all seemed like they were waiting to see a good show. One of them was the master of the Western Spiritual Mountain, while the other was the master of the 33rd heaven. Both of them could be described as supreme figures in the three realms. Now that they had encountered each other in Longevity Mountain, if either of them retreated in the slightest, the various experts would secretly mock them. Suddenly, a clamor rang out. A woman in white walked along the mountain path towards the fifth manor. However, with her appearance, the entire Longevity Mountain immediately fell silent, as if her appearance was the only thing in the world. Empyrean Fairy? Why has she come? Empress Ziwei cried out. Ba. Duo Bao Rilai's face changed slightly. He no longer glanced at Yi Xian. He first bowed towards the Empyrean Fairy, before quickly looking away and walking towards the fifth manor. The various experts' breathing quickened slightly. All of them seemed to be slightly infatuated. Yi Xian was slightly stunned by this as well. He directly looked towards the Empyrean Fairy. Chapter 524. If the Empyrean Fairy was the most beautiful woman in the three realms, then the Empyrean Fairy was on par with her. However, the Empyrean Fairy did not have the beauty of the Empyrean Fairy, but her temperament was unique in the three realms. She was covered in immortal light and holy light. Her body was covered in a simple white palace gauze, and her skin was as translucent as jade. Her hair was tied into a bun, and her eyes were like stars. She gave people the feeling that they could only look at her from afar, and not profane her. The mysterious maiden of the 9 heavens was elegant and otherworldly. Her beauty was not breathtaking, but when one looked at her, one's soul would melt. Because of this, the pure and holy aura around her was too intoxicating, giving people the urge to hold her in their arms and cherish her tenderly. She was cold and holy, graceful and luxurious. She was like a pretty girl from a humble family, and she also had a kind of holy beauty. When all these qualities were displayed on the Empyrean Fairy, it did not make people feel strange. Instead, it presented an extremely attractive and unique temperament. At this moment, Yi Xian focused his gaze on the Empyrean Fairy. His heart, which had been calm for thousands of years, could not help but thump. A feeling called love appeared in Yi Xian's mind. Yi Xian believed that he was an emotionless person. If he had ever been interested in a woman, then the Empyrean Fairy would definitely be number one. He also believed that besides the Empyrean Fairy, no other woman in the three realms could attract him. But today, Yi Xian was wrong, and very wrong. When the Empyrean Fairy came into view, a feeling called desire burned in his eyes. With just a glance, Yi Xian dared to tell himself with absolute certainty that he wanted to obtain this woman. This had nothing to do with love, it was just a man's desire for a woman. Shameless. Suddenly, when the Empyrean Fairy passed by Yi Xian, she frowned and a trace of disgust flashed in her eyes. Although her voice was not loud, Yi Xian heard it very well. It was no wonder that the Empyrean Fairy felt disgust towards Yi Xian. It was because Yi Xian did not hide his gaze at all. He stared at her so blatantly. The Empyrean Fairy had seen this kind of gaze too many times. It was the look of a man's desire for a woman. Although the Empyrean Fairy was no stranger to this kind of gaze, almost all the immortals and demons who saw her had this kind of gaze. Those people tried their best to hide their emotions. How could they be like Yi Xian, who was so blatant and unrestrained? Of course, although the Empyrean Fairy had never seen Yi Xian, She knew that Yi Xian was the new celestial emperor. However, in the eyes of the Empyrean fairy, whether it was the former Jade Emperor or the current Yi Tiandi, she did not care about Yi Xian at all because she was a disciple of a sage. Yes, she was a disciple of a sage, and not an ordinary one. As everyone knew, there were a total of 6 sages in the world aside from Tao ancestor Hongjun. There was no need to mention the 3 pure ones, and the 2 sages of the West. Each sage had many disciples under them. The Empyrean fairy was Nua's disciple, and her only disciple. She cultivated in Nua's palace all year round. If not for the invitation of the grand immortal Zhen Yuan, the Empyrean fairy would not have come to Longevity Mountain at all. The Empyrean fairy was born from the spirit of heaven and earth. She was a legendary born Taoism aptitude. When she was born, she was in the immortal realm. Later, she was taken in by Nua and cultivated by Nua's side from a young age. She herself had a born Taoism aptitude. Every day, she followed by Nua's side and was bathed in the holy light. This made her pure and refined. She did not have the slightest bit of mortal aura. As a disciple of a sage and Nua's disciple, the Empyrean fairy could indeed be proud. Moreover, her temperament and appearance were the best in the 3 realms. It was impossible for her to take any man seriously. From the beginning to the end, the mysterious maiden of the 9 heavens didn't even look at Yi Xian. She directly walked past him and headed towards the 5 manor. This also caused the various supreme experts to look at Yi Xian with ridicule in their eyes. Yi Xian was indeed infamous. Yi Xian had even killed the Jade Emperor and Queen Mother, and ascended to the position of Celestial Emperor. Even Duobao Rilai of the West was somewhat afraid of you. But so what? In front of the Empyrean fairy, even a sage-to-be had to show her some respect. She was the only disciple of Empress Nua. Why would she take Yi Xian seriously? Although no one jumped out to laugh at Yi Xian, the mighty figure's eyes were extremely playful. Obviously, they all had the same idea. Yi Xian could completely feel the playful eyes of the mighty figures. However, Yi Xian did not show any anger. He just looked at the Empyrean fairy's back with a strange look. It was mentioned before that Yi Xian was also a man. As a man, he had desires. However, Yi Xian controlled these desires very well. He did not take a fancy to those vulgar women. The only one who could catch his eye was the moon fairy. However, with the appearance of the Empyrean fairy, Yi Xian knew that he had feelings for this woman. It was a feeling of wanting to conquer her. In other words, Yi Xian liked women who thought too highly of themselves. Moreover, they were cold and arrogant women. Whether it was the moon fairy or the Empyrean fairy, both of them were such women who thought too highly of themselves. For such women, they could arouse the deepest desire in Yi Xian's heart. Yi Xian had the impulse to press her noble and inviolable body under his body and ravage her, tearing off her cold and aloof appearance, and dragging her into hell. This was the tyrannical desire hidden deep in Yi Xian's heart. It could also be said that Yi Xian was a demon-like man. In Yi Xian's eyes, women could only be his playthings. No matter how powerful their background was, or how beautiful they were, this was always Yi Xian's unchanging belief. Furthermore, there was one thing that Yi Xian hated the most, and that was that women pretended to be aloof. As long as this kind of woman wasn't slaughtered by him, he would tear off her lofty outer garment and ruthlessly drag her into hell. Of course, the only women who could catch Yi Xian's eye were the moon fairy and the Empyrean fairy. Today, the Empyrean fairy called Yi Xian shameless, which aroused the tyrannical desire deep in Yi Xian's heart. Buzz! With a single step, Yi Xian directly walked towards the 9 heavens mystical maiden. This also caused the expressions of the various supreme experts to freeze as they looked at Yi Xian, with eyes filled with extreme shock. What is he going to do? Has Yi Tiandi gone mad? He's actually going to provoke the Empyrean fairy? Mad, he must be mad. The Empyrean fairy is not a weak fairy. Not only is she a terrifying figure in the 3rd watershed of Grand Heavenly Immortal, she's also the last disciple of Her Majesty Nua. A worthy younger brother, you can't provoke the Empyrean fairy. Come back quickly. Empress Ziwei's expression changed drastically. She hurriedly sent a voice transmission to Yi Xian. She was deeply afraid that Yi Xian would do something bad without knowing the Empyrean fairy's identity. Unfortunately, Yi Xian did not seem to hear Empress Ziwei's advice. At this moment, he had already blocked the Empyrean fairy's path. He looked at the Empyrean fairy with a naked possessive gaze. Chapter 525. Get out of my way. The Empyrean fairy was a woman, but she was no weakling. She was a terrifying figure of the third watershed of origin Immortal. Though she had no accomplishments in the three realms, how could a disciple of a saint be ordinary? Now that Yi Xian was blocking her path and staring at her with a gaze that made her loathe him, the Empyrean fairy felt ashamed and angry. She looked at Yi Xian with even colder eyes. I really hate this pretentious attitude of yours. It's just like how you loathe me right now. Yi Xian smiled and did not try to avoid it. He examined the Empyrean fairy from head to toe. His naked gaze seemed to penetrate through the Empyrean fairy's white veil and invade every inch of her skin. Upon hearing Yi Xian's words and sensing Yi Xian's invasive gaze, the Empyrean fairy's cold and holy face gradually flushed red. Her immortal light became extremely disordered, and her starry eyes were filled with extreme anger. Shameless bastard! Do you really think that I won't dare to kill you in Longevity Mountain? Clang! The thunderous hum of a sword resounded as origin immortal light surged in all directions, causing space-time to distort. The Empyrean fairy gripped her sword and locked onto Yi Xian with unimaginable killing intent. Scram! The Empyrean fairy rebuked as origin immortal light erupted from her body. Clearly, if Yi Xian continued to harass her, she would attack Yi Xian regardless of whether or not this place was Longevity Mountain. Just you, Yi Xian sneered. He did not put the Empyrean fairy in his eyes. Although the Empyrean fairy was at the third watershed of origin immortal realm, she was only at the seventh heavenly layer of origin immortal realm. Moreover, with Yi Xian's rich combat experience, he could tell at a glance that this woman had no combat experience at all, and was full of flaws. Shameless bastard, I'll kill you. The mysterious maiden of the 9 heavens cursed hatefully. When she slashed out with her sword, the entire world was collapsing. Her cultivation at the third watershed of the golden immortal realm was too terrifying, and the laws of heaven and earth that violently surged out all smashed towards Yi Xian. Buzz! The tribulation transcender transformation was activated. Yi Xian's 3,000 black threads turned blood red as a blood moon appeared on his forehead. His origin immortal body and Yi rumble. With a single punch, the world turned upside down. Even the Longevity Mountain shook violently. With just a single punch, the sword light of the mystic lady of the 9 heavens was shattered, and the laws of the world were suppressed. But this was not the end. Yi Xian's combat strength was too terrifying. Under the stimulation of the tribulation transcender transformation, the wisp of chaotic fog wrapped around his body. His fists were like stars in the sky as they violently smashed toward the Empyrean fairy with ruthless force. Crack! With a punch, everything exploded. The Empyrean fairy could not dodge at all, and the immortal sword in her hand shattered inch by inch. Yi Xian's dazzling fist shattered the void and mercilessly smashed into the Empyrean fairy's chest. Bang! The world shook, and the Empyrean fairy was stained with blood. The Empyrean fairy was sent flying, and her chest and ribs were collapsing. Her beautiful face was pale, and blood flowed out from the corner of her mouth. Rumble! The Empyrean fairy was smashed into the mountain by Yi Xian's fist, and the shattered mountain was too horrible to look at. Such a scene made the mighty figures look at each other in shock, and they could not believe their eyes. What did they just see? The Empyrean fairy was dignified and noble, and she was in existence not inferior to the moon fairy. Moreover, she was a disciple of a sage. How could she be beaten so violently by Yi Xian? Yi Xian, I'll kill you! Just as everyone felt as if they had fallen into a dream, an extremely embarrassed and angry voice sounded out from the mountain. The mountain collapsed into smoke, and the clouds in the sky turned into smoke. A shocking immortal light rose up, and within the terrifying immortal light, the 9 heavens' mysterious maiden's face flushed red. Her gaze towards Yi Xian was filled with extreme hatred. Endless time had passed, and the Empyrean fairy had never been treated and humiliated like this. It was simply unbearable. Rumble. The sky shook, and the immortal light split the sky. It was the third watershed of the grand heavenly immortal realm after all. Even though the Empyrean fairy did not have much combat experience, her cultivation was there for all to see. Her abhijna was even passed down from sage Nuwa. How could she be bullied so easily? A speck of immortal light illuminated the universe and cut through the sky. The Empyrean fairy seemed to be dancing in the sky, and immortal light runes were born around her. A mottled ancient mirror appeared above her head, and it was releasing an extremely ancient aura. Kunlun mirror? Such a scene caused an uproar among the mighty figures. Everyone had an extremely solemn look in their eyes, and they quietly retreated into the distance. A worthy younger brother retreat quickly. Emperor Ziwei reminded in a low voice. The appearance of the Kunlun mirror made his heart heavy. The Kunlun mirror, an innate spiritual treasure, was an extremely terrifying treasure since the creation of the world. Legend had it that the Kunlun mirror had the power to travel through time, and in the hands of a sage, it could travel through the past and the future. Although this legend was somewhat exaggerated, it also proved how terrifying the Kunlun mirror was. Moreover, the Kunlun mirror was Empress Nuwa's treasure. No one would have thought that it would be passed down to the Empyrean fairy. It could erode one's Tao, destroy one's vital spirit, and allow one to see 10,000 years in a blink of an eye. This was the terrifying part of the Kunlun mirror, and it was filled with the power of time. It did not matter if one was Daoyuo Jinxian or a quasi-sage. As long as the person controlling the Kunlun mirror had a sufficient cultivation, they could be killed. Have I gone too far? Looking at the Empyrean fairy dancing in the sky, Yi Xian frowned slightly, and a hint of self-mockery appeared in his eyes. In fact, he just did not like the Empyrean fairy's high and mighty attitude, and wanted to teach her a lesson. He did not expect the Empyrean fairy to use the Kunlun mirror. Clearly, she wanted to fight to the death with him. Of course, Yi Xian never regretted his actions. Although he knew how terrifying the Kunlun mirror was, it depended on who had the treasure. Although the Empyrean fairy was at the third watershed of Daoyuo realm, she had just stepped into this realm, and was not worthy of Yi Xian's attention. Time. Suddenly, the Empyrean fairy stopped dancing, and the Kunlun mirror appeared in her hand. A mottled yellow light fell from the mirror, and directly attacked Yi Xian. The power of time was extremely terrifying, and it even contained the laws of time and space. Even figures at the third watershed of Daoyuo realm did not dare to touch it, or they would face the danger of death. Rumble. The mirror light fell, and the world distorted. The indescribable power of time instantly attacked Yi Xian, and he did not even have the time to dodge. This also caused Yi Xian's expression to change slightly, and he frantically activated the undying immortal scripture to resist the terrifying mirror light. A worthy younger brother, be careful. Emperor Ziwei's face was extremely pale. He knew how terrifying the Kunlun mirror was. Even though the Empyrean fairy was only at the 7th level of Daoyuo realm, Yi Xian's life was still in danger with this treasure in her hand. Yi Tiandi could have provoked anyone, but he just had to provoke the Empyrean fairy. At this moment, he is being suppressed by the Kunlun mirror. Even if he doesn't die, his cultivation will drop greatly. The two freaks of Mount Mang sneered. Chapter 526. How can a grand immortal resist Empress Nuwa's treasure? Yi Xian was too arrogant when he just ascended to the position of celestial emperor. It's only natural for him to face this tribulation. A fourth heavenly layer grand immortal coldly said. The Longevity Mountain is a quasi-sage training ground. Such a huge commotion will definitely alarm Senior Jin Yuanzi. Yi Xian's life shouldn't be in danger. A Daoyuo Jinxian confidently said. Yi Xian, you humiliated me first. I'll definitely teach you a lesson today. The Empyrean fairy's face was cold. She formed an immortal seal with both hands, causing the Kunlun mirror to shine brightly. The power of time flowed endlessly and swallowed Yi Xian like a vast river. Empyrean fairy, please show mercy. Yi Tiandi didn't intentionally humiliate you. Empress Myrtlestar asked anxiously. He was only at the 3rd level of Grand Luo, and was no match for the 9 Heavens maiden at all. Moreover, she had the Kunlun mirror in her possession, so he had no choice but to plead with her. Ziwei, if you don't teach this shameless fellow a lesson today, he won't know what respect is, the Empyrean fairy coldly rebuked, not giving Emperor Ziwei any face. Haha. All of a sudden, a maniacal laughter was heard. What happened next left all the mighty figures speechless, because what happened next was simply too shocking. Bang! Space-time was thrown into chaos, as a wisp of dark mist appeared. An extremely strange and profound aura bloomed. The power of time that drowned Yi Xian was annihilated inch by inch, and the wild laughter came from Yi Xian's mouth. Rumble! The world turned upside down and the clouds roiled. When Yi Xian took a step forward, the power of time around him was completely annihilated. The terrifying origin immortal light soared into the sky, causing the entire longevity mountain to rumble and shake. Impossible! Such a scene caused the Nine Heavens maiden to scream in shock. She couldn't believe that under the suppression of the Kunlun mirror, not only was Yi Xian safe and sound, he didn't even have the slightest bit of a weak aura around him. You dare to show off your slight skill before an expert with such insignificant skills? Yi Xian's face was gloomy, and his voice was cold and sinister. He looked at the Empyrean fairy with a hint of murderous intent. Just a little bit more. The Kunlun mirror's power was too terrifying. Even Yi Xian felt a great sense of danger, and was about to be heavily injured by the Kunlun mirror. But when Yi Xian used the Tribulation Transcenda transformation, and the Immortal Scripture, an aura that did not belong to the three realms erupted from his body. The so-called power of time was annihilated inch by this aura, and to Yi Xian's surprise, the power of time released by the Kunlun mirror had no effect on him at all. The Empyrean fairy bit her lip as she looked at Yi Xian with a complicated expression. Impossible, absolutely impossible. What kind of cultivation technique do you cultivate? When Her Highness Nuwa had given her the Kunlun mirror, she had specifically told her that this mirror had the ability to seize the good fortune of the world and reverse the space-time laws of the three realms. It possessed unfathomable power, let alone the fact that Yi Xian was a Daluo Jingxian. Even if he was a quasi-saint, he would not be able to remain so calm before the Kunlun mirror. This was clearly related to the cultivation technique he cultivated. A primal chaos divine art? Suddenly, a thought flashed through the Nine Heavens' mysterious maiden's mind. She abruptly looked at Yi Xian with a trace of panic in her eyes. It couldn't be wrong. It couldn't be wrong. Only a primal chaos divine art could ignore the power of the Kunlun mirror. But the primal chaos divine art was only a legend. Even saints studied it, so how could Yi Xian have a primal chaos divine art? Thump, thump, thump. Primal chaos thunder boomed, and the river of time surged. In the Empyrean fairy's dazed eyes, Yi Xian was striding toward her. The origin immortal light around him was as dazzling as the blazing sun, and destructive ripples of energy erupted from Yi Xian's body. Slut die. With one step the world collapsed. The origin immortal body tore through the heavens, causing space to explode and sparks to fly. This allowed Yi Xian to appear in front of the Empyrean fairy. Rumble. The six desires were emotionless, and the world was heartless. Yi Xian was sinister and vicious, and as he thrust his palm at the Empyrean fairy, space-time began to distort and crumble. This energy that could bury all things was terrifying to the extreme. At this moment, the Empyrean fairy came to her senses and poured her origin immortal energy into the Kunlun mirror. The dreadful power of time began to envelop her body in the hopes of blocking Yi Xian's heaven-shaking strike. Bang! Mountains and rivers collapsed and all things were reduced to dust. Yi Xian's palm was too stunning and too merciless. It completely ignored the power of time unleashed by the Kunlun mirror and sent the Empyrean fairy flying. Plush! Blood gushed out of the Empyrean fairy's mouth, staining her white robes and messy her hair. She plummeted to the ground like a broken kite. Slut, if I don't teach you a lesson today, do you really think you're some high and mighty goddess who can look down on this emperor? Yi Xian coldly said. He didn't hold back in the slightest. When he took a step forward, he didn't wait for the Nine Heavens maiden to fall to the ground. His right leg transformed into a long whip that violently lashed out at her chest, causing her to spit out blood. Her appearance was too miserable. Bang! It was as if a divine mountain had fallen to the world, as if a star had smashed into the ground. Yi Xian's feet were glowing, and under the terrified gazes of the supreme experts in all directions, he actually stepped on the chest of the 9 heavens' mysterious maiden, causing the two of them to fall to the ground together. Rumble! The ground caved in for tens of thousands of feet, and extremely terrifying ravines appeared. Dust filled the air. After dozens of breaths, when the dust in the air dissipated, an extremely terrifying scene appeared before the eyes of the mighty experts. They stared blankly, as if they had fallen into a nightmare. On the mountain, there was a human-shaped crater. The Empyrean fairy's hair was messy, and blood was flowing out of her mouth. The most unacceptable thing was that this goddess who reigned supreme over the 3 realms was being ruthlessly stepped on by Yi Xian. This was simply unacceptable. Slut! How dare you pretend to be virtuous in front of this emperor? Do you want to die? Bang! Yi Xian was cold and merciless. His voice was extremely sinister. His right foot suddenly stomped on the Empyrean fairy's chest, causing the sound of bones cracking to be extremely ear-piercing. Puffed! The Empyrean fairy vomited blood, her face as pale as a sheet of paper. Her entire body was heavily injured and muddle-headed. She was the Empyrean fairy, the disciple of a saint, and a woman who stood shoulder to shoulder with the lunar fairy. Her appearance and bearing could be described as peerless. She had never imagined that she would one day be stepped on by a man, and be humiliated in such a manner. But the excruciating pain in her body told the Empyrean fairy that she was not dreaming. This sort of thing was happening to her body, and she found it impossible to accept. Yi Xian, I'll kill you. Finally, the mysterious maiden of the 9 heavens faced the truth. Her eyes were filled with tears of shame and anger, as the zenith heaven immortal light around her slightly bloomed. However, she was being stepped on by Yi Xian, and didn't have the slightest ability to resist. Chapter 527. It wasn't that the Empyrean fairy wasn't strong, but it was because her combat experience was practically zero. Moreover, she was only at the 7th level of the Golden Immortal Realm. How could she be a match for Yi Xian, who was a veteran and ruthless figure? Most importantly, Yi Xian's origin immortal body and indestructible soul core were too terrifying. And Yi Xian's body was the most terrifying treasure. Even the bodies of grand shamans of the shaman race were inferior to his body. So how could the Empyrean fairy be a match for him in close combat? If the Empyrean fairy had executed a powerful technique, and maintained a safe distance from Yi Xian, then even if she wasn't a match for Yi Xian, she would absolutely not have lost so miserably. Unfortunately, the Empyrean fairy didn't have the chance. She had been heavily injured by Yi Xian, and she was unable to utilize her cultivation under the suppression of Yi Xian's origin immortal light. At this moment, she was like a lamb waiting to be slaughtered, and she could only allow Yi Xian to trample on her. Yi Xian's face was emotionless as he ruthlessly crushed the Empyrean fairy's disheveled hair and lifted her into the air, causing her to cry out in pain. It was like he was dealing with a pig or a dog, and it was extremely brutal. Such a scene was simply unbearable to watch, and it caused the great figures in the surroundings to be jolted awake. The gazes they shot at Yi Xian even revealed extreme hostility. Yi Tiandi released the Empyrean fairy. Rumble! Dozens of golden lights shot over, and the might that blotted out the sky and covered the entire 10,000 years mountain. These people included immortals, demons and devils, and all of them were supreme beings. The weakest among them was at the 4th level of the Great Luo stage, and they instantly surrounded Yi Xian in the center. It was obvious that Yi Xian's ruthless actions had already aroused the anger of the crowd. Everyone loved beauty, and all the great figures present adored the Empyrean fairy. They simply couldn't accept watching Yi Xian torture the Empyrean fairy. Scram! A roar that could shatter mountains and rivers and bury all things. This simple word from Yi Xian's mouth revealed the might of a celestial emperor, causing the various great figures' expressions to change. Their gazes towards Yi Xian grew increasingly solemn. Apprehension, heaviness, and a feeling called fear rose in their hearts. There were too many legends about Yi Xian. He had killed the Jade Emperor and Queen Mother, forced Duo Bao Rulai to bow to him, and had a battle prowess that wasn't weaker than the third level of the Golden Immortal Realm. Even if dozens of supreme beings joined forces, they still wouldn't be a match for Yi Xian. Only an existence at the peak of the Golden Immortal Realm, and that high and mighty quasi-saint, might be able to take down this heavenly Emperor Yi. Yi Tiandi, where it's possible to let people off, one should spare them. Moreover, the Empyrean Fairy is the disciple of the Niwa Empress. If the Niwa Palace punishes you for humiliating her like this today, your position as Celestial Emperor will be lost. A Daoyuo Jingxian stepped out from the crowd. He was at the fourth level of the Golden Immortal Realm, and cultivated the Taoist lineage. At this moment, he put on a fierce front and advised Yi Xian. His palm was like the heavens, capable of crushing all things. Yi Xian didn't seem to move at all. He simply thrust out his palm, and the winds and clouds within millions of miles churned. The immortal light of the Golden Immortal, that could kill gods and immortals, directly descended on the man's head. Bang! His body shattered and his soul extinguished. He didn't even have time to scream before Yi Xian killed him on the spot. Silence, silence, a deathly silence. When this scene appeared before the eyes of the various great figures, all of them instantly paled, and their feet involuntarily retreated. Lawless and ferocious, Yi Xian killed without hesitation. This horrified them to the extreme, and they looked at Yi Xian with extreme fear. No one wanted to die. Even these golden immortals of the great all-embracing heaven were no exception. They did not know how long they had cultivated to reach their current cultivation level. Even though they admired the Empyrean maiden, compared with their own lives, they still chose their own lives. Scram! A simple word came out of Yi Xian's mouth. This caused the various supreme beings to be embarrassed and angry, but they didn't dare to refute him in the slightest. This also caused them to look at each other. Helplessness and humiliation flashed through their eyes as they slowly retreated. It was obvious that they couldn't interfere in this matter. Yi Xian, you've bullied me like this. I'll definitely take revenge in the future. The Empyrean Fairy's eyes were filled with tears as Yi Xian held her messy hair in his hand. Her voice was filled with extreme shame and anger, and she looked at Yi Xian with extreme shame and anger. Revenge? Yi Xian sneered and said, "You bitch! Do you think you still have a chance to take revenge?" Crack. Suddenly, Yi Xian stretched out his left hand and grabbed the Empyrean Fairy's neck with his terrifying fingers. An extremely terrifying force appeared on Yi Xian's fingers, causing the Empyrean Fairy's throat to emit an extremely ear-piercing sound of bone cracking. Ugh! The Empyrean Fairy let out a muffled groan. Her ghastly pale face turned ashen, and there was extreme fear in her eyes. She no longer had her cold and aloof demeanor from before. Let me go." The Empyrean Fairy struggled to speak, as Yi Xian grabbed her by the neck. Her eyes were already showing signs of submission, because she could completely sense from Yi Xian's emotionless gaze that he was a madman. He did not care about her status at all, nor did he care about her unparalleled beauty in the three realms. "Let you go." Yi Xian smiled. He really smiled, but his smile was strange and sinister. The Empyrean Fairy's heart tightened as a feeling of death invaded her mind. "I'm a very easygoing person, and I don't like fighting and killing. As long as you kneel at my feet and kowtow to me 3 times, I'll definitely let you go. What do you think of this Emperor's suggestion?" Yi Xian said with a smile, but in the Empyrean Fairy's eyes, his smile was like that of a demon that had crawled out of hell. It made her feel extremely afraid. "No. Impossible. You can change your condition." The Empyrean Fairy struggled to speak. Her pride and dignity could not accept kneeling in front of Yi Xian. However, the fear in her eyes intensified. "Oh, impossible?" Yi Xian smiled sinisterly and said, "This emperor has already given you a chance. You are the one who doesn't know how to cherish it. So don't blame this emperor for being ruthless." Crack. Yi Xian's fingers tightened, and the Empyrean Fairy's neck began to twist irregularly. It was as if he was really going to break her neck in the next moment. I agree." The great terror between life and death instantly destroyed the Empyrean Fairy's last shred of shame. In the face of death, Even though she had always been cold and arrogant, and did not care about anyone, she could only lower her proud head under Yi Xian's merciless pressure. Bang! Yi Xian smiled contemptuously, and casually threw the Empyrean fairy to the ground like trash. This caused the Empyrean fairy to cough violently as she gasped for air. Kneel. Suddenly, Yi Xian's smile disappeared. His eyes were sinister and vicious, and his voice was heard by the Empyrean fairy. This was a great humiliation. He had gone too far. These words fully described Yi Xian's current attitude. However, in the face of Yi Xian's merciless pressure, the Empyrean fairy bit her lips as tears of grievance flowed from her eyes. Finally, she knelt in front of Yi Xian under the horrified gazes of all the mighty figures. Thump, 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 thump. The Empyrean fairy clenched her fists so tightly that her fingernails dug into her palms. She quickly kowtowed to Yi Xian 3 times, and then quickly stood up. She looked at Yi Xian with an extremely hateful gaze and said, "Yi Xian, are you satisfied now? You must remember this. Put away your arrogant and holy attitude in front of me. Otherwise, I won't just make you kneel and kowtow next time. I will let you know what it means to be caught between a rock and a hard place. Do you understand?" Yi Xian narrowed his eyes. His voice was cold and tyrannical. The Empyrean fairy's heart trembled when she saw Yi Xian's sinister gaze. She subconsciously replied, I understand. Speak louder. I didn't hear you. I understand. Sob, sob, sob. The Empyrean fairy cried loudly. She no longer had the demeanor of a goddess. It was as if she had turned into an ordinary girl who had been bullied to the extreme. She rode on a golden cloud and shot toward the 5th manor. Chapter 528. The heavens and earth were silent. The entire Longevity Mountain was deathly silent. Because the various experts were terrified, no one made a sound. They looked at Yi Xian with complicated gazes. If Yi Xian's notoriety had spread across the 3 realms, then Yi Xian's actions today had widened the horizons of the various experts. They became even more fearful of Yi Xian. Putting aside the fact that the Empyrean fairy was a devastatingly beautiful goddess, just her identity as the disciple of the Nuwa was enough to make few people dare to provoke her. To put it bluntly, even a quasi-saint would have to show some respect to the Empyrean fairy on account of the Nuwa. But what had they seen today? Not only had Yi Xian beaten up the Empyrean fairy, he had even humiliated her without restraint. He had forced her to kneel before him. This had completely overturned the views of the various experts. Over 1,000 Daluo Jingxian were outstanding talents of the 3 realms. Today, they had witnessed Yi Xian's ferocious methods. However, a few of them merely watched coldly from the sidelines. They were not afraid of Yi Xian at all. These people were all at the 3rd watershed of the Daluo realm. They were also figures who were revered as ancestors in the 3 realms. Although Yi Xian had humiliated the Empyrean fairy, and even severely injured her, they were not afraid of the cultivation that Yi Xian had displayed. Those who could cultivate to the 3rd watershed of the Daluo realm had already reached the pinnacle in both their abilities and techniques. They were also very experienced in battle. The battle between Yi Xian and the Empyrean fairy was not even worth mentioning in their eyes. It could only be said that the Empyrean fairy was a flower in a greenhouse. It was only natural for her to be defeated by a vicious and ruthless person like Yi Xian. If they were to fight with Yi Xian, it was still unknown who would emerge victorious. Of course, these terrifying figures at the 3rd watershed of the Daluo realm were also very surprised by Yi Xian's battle prowess. His aura was clearly at the 3rd heavenly layer of the Daluo realm, but his battle prowess was extremely heaven-defying. They could not understand the reason behind this. Moreover, under the observation of some observant people, Yi Xian had caused such a huge commotion. But the 5th manor did not react at all, and allowed Yi Xian to act wantonly on Longevity Mountain. It was not as simple as it seemed. After all, the 5th manor of Longevity Mountain was Zhen Yuanzi's training ground. Zhen Yuanzi was known as the ancestor of earthly immortals, and even had the cultivation of a quasi-saint. However, Zhen Yuanzi did not appear to stop this farce. Clearly, The relationship between Yi Xian and Zhen Yuanzi was not ordinary. A full dozen breaths of time passed. Various mighty figures had different thoughts as they all followed the mountain path towards the fifth manor. However, they remembered Yi Xian's ruthless methods. A worthy younger brother, you've caused a huge disaster. Emperor Ziwei and Immortal Jin Guangxian quickly walked over. Their faces were filled with worry. Clearly, Yi Xian's ruthless attack on the Empyrean Fairy had caused Emperor Ziwei to be extremely worried. Elder brother, there's no need to worry. She's just a lowly servant who pretends to be virtuous. She can't cause any trouble. Yi Xian smiled. He did not care about the Empyrean Fairy at all. Sigh. Emperor Ziwei helplessly sighed. She didn't know what to say. However, Yi Xian had humiliated the Empyrean Fairy today. If this girl were to tell Her Highness Nuwa about this, it would definitely cause unnecessary trouble for Yi Xian. In fact, Emperor Ziwei didn't know that Yi Xian had never wanted to make things difficult for the Empyrean Fairy. It was just that the Empyrean Fairy was too pretentious and disrespectful to Yi Xian. This was why Yi Xian forced her to kneel. Yi Xian's thoughts were very simple. He was the celestial emperor of the three realms, so he naturally had the dignity of a celestial emperor. However, an Empyrean Fairy relied on her looks and background to look down on him. This girl was destined to suffer a great calamity. Virtuous? Holy? Goddess? Perhaps in the eyes of others, the Empyrean Fairy was unreachable and untouchable. However, in Yi Xian's eyes, the Empyrean Fairy was just a plaything. Moreover, she was Yi Xian's plaything. Yi Xian had to admit that he was very interested in this girl. The Empyrean Fairy's aloofness aroused the hidden desire in his heart. However, Yi Xian wasn't going to be a bootlicker like others. She was a woman. In Yi Xian's eyes, she was just a plaything. He could play with her however he wanted, but he definitely wouldn't allow her to do as she pleased. This was Yi Xian's attitude towards women. Even the Empyrean Fairy was no exception. The Celestial Emperor's methods are unfathomable. This little immortal is impressed. Jin Guangxian smiled slightly. After witnessing Yi Xian's ruthless methods, Jin Guangxian also knew that Yi Xian was able to ascend to the position of Celestial Emperor for a reason. After this episode, the three of them continued to walk towards the Five Villages Temple. However, along the way, all the powerful figures avoided Yi Xian and kept a safe distance from him. Five Villages Temple. Qingfeng and Mingyu stood on both sides of the gate. Their green Taoist robes covered their bodies, and the immortal light around them rose slightly. Although the two of them were only Taoist children, the powerful figures didn't dare to look down on them. The patriarch is already waiting at the Infinite Dojo. Please go quickly and don't miss the opportunity, Taoist child Qingfeng said with a smile. Amitba, Duo Bao Rilai chanted the name of Buddha and strolled into the Five Villages Temple. The rest of the people followed quickly. When Yi Xian and his group arrived in front of the Five Villages Temple, the two Taoist children, Qingfeng and Mingyu, smiled and nodded at Yi Xian and invited Yi Xian and his group to enter. Yi Xian strolled into the Five Villages Temple, and the scene in front of him suddenly changed. This small Five Villages Temple was actually a different world. The sky was high and immortal fog rose. The roars of dragons and tigers could be heard. Countless immortal birds and spirit beasts were playing in this world. There were also spirit plants that Yi Xian had never seen before rooted in the soil. The spirit roots that were tens of thousands of feet tall were filled with unknown spirit fruits. However, the spirit energy contained in these spirit fruits was extremely rich. 10,000-year-old red fruit? 80,000-year-old Chinese knotweed? 33,000-year-old snow ginseng. Along the way, Yi Xian saw many spiritual essences of heaven and earth. This Five Villages Temple was like a treasure house of spirit herbs in the three realms. It was an eye-opener for Yi Xian. The foundation of a sage-to-be was indeed extraordinary. Yi Xian had a panoramic view of the Five Villages Temple and became more and more curious about the grand immortal Zhen Yuan. Yi Xian made a rough estimate. If the spiritual essences of heaven and earth in the Five Villages Temple were used to create immortals, they could create hundreds of Daluo Jingxian just by relying on these spiritual essences. Hundreds of Daluo Jingxian. What kind of concept was this? It could completely support a huge orthodoxy. If the Grand Immortal Zhen Yuan was willing, he could raise his arm and call for help. There would definitely be an extremely terrifying force in the three realms. A worthy younger brother, the Limitless Dojo is right in front of us. Every time the path discussion meeting is held, it will be held in the Limitless Dojo. Let's go there quickly, Emperor Ziwei said. There was a door that was surrounded by immortal light. Various powerful people were entering in a single file. Obviously, these people had participated in the path discussion meeting every 10,000 years. They were already familiar with entering the Limitless Dojo. Chapter 529. Changing Heaven and Earth, and opening up a small world, was a method unique to quasi-saints. The Limitless Dojo was an independent space, and was where Grand Immortal Zhen Yuan preached. Under the guidance of Emperor Ziwei, Yi Xian, and the other two also entered the door of immortal light. The Limitless Dojo. Chaos and nothingness surrounded this misty space. Strands of chaotic aura lingered in this space, and stars twinkled in the nothingness. A Taoist was sitting cross-legged on top of the dome. He had black hair and a black beard, and he wore a purple-gold Taoist robe. Although he didn't reveal any aura, he made people feel small and insignificant. The ancestor of earthly immortals, Grand Immortal Zhen Yuan. Since Pango opened the sky and Hongjun preached the Tao, Grand Immortal Zhen Yuan was a quasi-saint between heaven and earth. He held the Earth Book, and was known as the ancestor of all immortals. He also had the innate spiritual root ginseng fruit tree, and experienced the Dragon Han initial tribulation, the Great Witch Demon War, the investiture of the Gods Tribulation, and the journey to the West Minor Tribulation. Below the sage level there were ups and downs. Even the sage-to-be who had experienced immeasurable tribulations were in danger of dying. However, after endless time, Immortal Zhen Yuan was still standing between heaven and earth without suffering any tribulations. From this, it could be seen that Zhen Yuanzi was no ordinary person. In the nothingness, green lotuses grew and bloomed one after another. All the mighty figures were solemn and silent. They found their own places to sit on the green lotuses, and then looked at Grand Immortal Zhen Yuan with pious reverence. Buzz! The nothingness fluctuated and ripples spread. When Yi Xian entered the Limitless Dojo, this was the scene that greeted his eyes. However, when he looked at Grand Immortal Zhen Yuan, his eyes slightly froze as a pressure as heaven and earth attacked him. Yi Xian lightly exhaled, and quickly operated the immortal scripture, dispersing the pressure of the quasi-saint. He then went straight to the front of the Limitless Dojo, and sat cross-legged on the green lotus. Oomph! Suddenly, a cold snort rang out. The Empyrean fairy glared at Yi Xian coldly. She sat obediently to the right of the Grand Immortal. She glared at Yi Xian with extreme shame and anger. You're too arrogant. Little friend, you will give you a light punishment today. It's better than being bullied by outsiders. Above the dome, Great Immortal Zhen Yuan smiled and lightly nodded towards Yi Xian. A trace of kindness appeared on his face. He's a shameless bastard, the Empyrean fairy muttered hatefully. However, she was much more obedient in front of Grand Immortal Zhen Yuan. Little friend, ye come. Grand Immortal Zhen Yuan smiled, and waved at Yi Xian. This startled Yi Xian. He didn't know what Grand Immortal Zhen Yuan meant. A worthy younger brother, quickly go over. This is a great opportunity for you. Before Yi Xian could react, Emperor Ziwei was overjoyed. She hurriedly sent a voice transmission to Yi Xian. This also made Yi Xian's eyes move. He got up from the green lotus, and walked toward Grand Immortal Zhen Yuan. Little friend Yi, and I have great karma. You're worthy of this seat. Grand Immortal Zhen Yuan stroked the void, and a green lotus grew beside him. He then smiled at Yi Xian. Obviously, he wanted Yi Xian to sit on his left. Hiss! Such a scene made all the mighty figures gasp. They looked at Yi Xian with increasingly solemn eyes. Duo Baorilai's face was as gloomy as water. A glint of fear flashed across his eyes. A sage-to-be's Tao discussion meeting. Every time a Tao discussion meeting was held, there would be 2 seats next to Grand Immortal Zhen Yuan. The 2 people who could sit next to him were almost equivalent to having Grand Immortal Zhen Yuan as their backs. However, these two seats were always empty every time a Dao discussion meeting was held. Today, one of the seats was occupied by the Empyrean Fairy. The mighty figures didn't find it strange. After all, the Empyrean Fairy was born from the essence of heaven and earth, and was the only disciple of Empress Nuwa. However, Yi Xian was different. His identity was too sensitive. Not only did he offend the Chan school, but he also targeted the Western Spirit Mountain. These two orthodoxies had 3 saints backing them. Although Yi Xian had the support of Tong Tian, his future was extremely bleak. After all, the great god investiture tribulation was an example. Didn't Tong Tian also fail and leave? Today, Grand Immortal Zhen Yuan actually allowed Yi Xian to sit next to him. This was clearly his attitude. How could this not make all the mighty figures extremely surprised? Yi Xian sat cross-legged next to Grand Immortal Zhen Yuan. His expression was calm, but a hint of doubt flashed across his eyes. Clearly, Yi Xian was also puzzled as to why Grand Immortal Zhen Yuan valued him so much. Pangu opened the heavens, Hongjun preached the Tao. Since the creation of the world, the rumbling Tao voice reverberated in all directions. The Tao discussion meeting had finally begun. Grand Immortal Zhen Yuan was slowly preaching the Tao, causing the entire limitless dojo to be silent. Only the intertwining Tao voice spread throughout the limitless dojo. The sage-to-be's preaching of the Tao went straight to the essence. This was a great opportunity that could make people fall into a state of enlightenment. Even the highly talented Daoyuo Jingxian could break through his shackles and enter the next realm from the sage-to-be's preaching of the Tao. Time flew by like a shuttle. Grand Immortal Zhen Yuan's preaching of the Tao took 30 years. The Tao of the entire limitless dojo was born, and the aura of the quasi-gods spread. All kinds of Tao between heaven and earth appeared, causing everyone to fall into an epiphany. Rumble. Daoyuo immortal light shot in all directions. Emperor Ziwei suddenly opened his eyes. His cultivation base of the 3rd firmament of Daoyuo directly broke through to the 4th firmament. A touch of excitement appeared on his face. Thank you, Master, for your help. Emperor Ziwei knelt down and kowtowed to Grand Immortal Zhen Yuan. His face was full of reverence. Bang, bang, bang. Several days passed. From time to time, Daoyuo Jingxian would break through his own realm, causing the entire limitless dojo to rumble. Clearly, it was because of Grand Immortal Zhen Yuan's preaching of the Tao that allowed them to break through their own shackles. Although there were only a handful of people who had broken through their own realm, and most of them were early-stage perfected golden immortals, the 2nd perfected heavenly realm and Duo Bao Rulai, who were at the peak of perfected heavenly realm, had also benefited a lot. At this moment, Yi Xian sat cross-legged beside Grand Immortal Zhen Yuan. He slowly opened his eyes, but a trace of disappointment flashed across his eyes. He had benefited a lot in these 30 years of preaching of the Tao. He was even close to Grand Immortal Zhen Yuan, and could feel the faintly discernible quasi-sage aura. However, he still had not broken through to the 4th firmament of Daoyuo Jingxian. 30 years have passed. This preaching of the Tao ends here. Other than little friend Yi and Empyrean Fairy, everyone else can leave. As Grand Immortal Zhen Yuan's words fell, all the mighty figures were slightly startled. Then, they looked at Yi Xian and the Empyrean Fairy meaningfully. Then, they bowed and bade farewell to Grand Immortal Zhen Yuan. A worthy younger brother, your opportunity has come. Before Emperor Ziwei left, he excitedly transmitted his voice to Yi Xian. Chapter 530. The infinite dojo was silent. Other than the wisps of chaotic aura lingering around, only the Grand Immortal Zhen Yuan was sitting cross-legged on the dome and smiling. Are you too curious as to why I want to keep the two of you here? Like the morning bell and evening drum, like the sound of the great Tao. The Grand Immortal Zhen Yuan's voice was very calm, and entered Yi Xian and Fairy's ears very well. This made the two of them nod, obviously having the same doubts in their hearts. Come with me, my two friends. Rumble. The infinite dojo rumbled as the Grand Immortal Zhen Yuan shone. This was the light of the sage-to-be, and the infinite light. This part of the world was distorted and changed at this moment. Buzz. The world changed and the scene changed greatly. When Yi Xian and the Empyrean Fairy opened their eyes, they were already in the Five-Manor Temple. This ability to change the world and move the universe made Yi Xian's eyes flash with a hint of fear. Terrifying, indeed terrifying. Unknowingly, he had been taken away from the Infinite Dojo by the Grand Immortal Zhen Yuan. If the Grand Immortal wanted to kill him, it would be done in an instant. Yi Xian quivered, and his mind trembled slightly. This was the first time he had seen the means of a sage-to-be. It also made Yi Xian understand that the so-called Daoyuo Jingxian was just an ant in the eyes of a sage-to-be. Even a sage-to-be was so terrifying. So how terrifying would the 6 great sages of the world be? My 2 friends, please sit. Immortal light flowed through the clouds and pavilions. Great Immortal Zhen Yuan gently stroked his sleeves, and a pavilion appeared, inviting Yi Xian and the 9 heavens mysterious maiden to enter. In the pavilion, there was a stone table, a pot of immortal tea, and nothing else. When Yi Xian and Yi Xian sat down, Great Immortal Zhen Yuan lightly smiled and personally poured tea for the 2 of them. After that, he looked at Yi Xian and Yi Xian with a strange gaze. This tea is called Dao Enlightenment, and is a rare treasure in the world. My 2 friends, please have a taste. Grand Immortal Zhen Yuan smiled, but the chaotic light around him rippled slightly. He looked at the 2 of them with an unfathomable expression. Grand Immortal Zhen Yuan's gaze was very strange. It was hard to understand what he was thinking, but Yi Xian didn't feel any malice from Grand Immortal Zhen Yuan. It was just that Yi Xian never trusted anyone, so he was still wary of him. Good tea. The Empyrean Fairy gently sipped the enlightenment tea in her cup, and her beautiful eyes lit up slightly. She couldn't help but exclaim in admiration, and the immortal light around her fluctuated to the extreme. Clearly, this cup of enlightenment tea was extraordinary, and even a disciple of a sage like her couldn't help but exclaim in admiration. Rumble. At the same time, Yi Xian took a sip of the enlightenment tea, and felt the immortal power in his body erupt like a volcano. His cultivation of the 3rd firmament of Grand Luo had risen to the extreme, and a terrifying force like the mountains and seas was attacking the 4th firmament of Grand Luo. Only after 10 breaths of time had passed did the surging immortal energy within his body calm down. However, Yi Xian, who was at the 4th level of the all-heaven immortal realm, still hadn't broken through. This caused him to frown as a deep sense of loss appeared in his eyes. If I'm not wrong, little friend Yi is cultivating the immortal scripture, right? Grand Immortal Zhen Yuan smiled and whispered to Yi Xian. That's right. May I know what Senior Zhen Yuan wants to teach me? Yi Xian nodded. The immortal scripture had been passed down in the 3 dimensions, since the heavens and the earth were split apart. No one knew who created this cultivation technique, but it was all-encompassing. So it was within reason that Grand Immortal Zhen Yuan was able to know this cultivation technique. The origins of the immortal scripture are mysterious. All those years ago in the Purple Cloud Palace, Dao ancestor Hongjun had personally mentioned this cultivation technique. But after the boundless passage of time, there are many people that have cultivated the immortal scripture, yet they are at most at the grand unity realm. Little friend, you're able to cultivate to the Daoyuo Jingxian realm, and this can be said to be an extremely great anomaly. Grand Immortal Zhen Yuan spoke tirelessly, and his gaze towards Yi Xian became even more strange. Yi Xian's eyes focused slightly when he heard Grand Immortal Zhen Yuan. He'd already discerned that this earthly immortal ancestor thought so highly of him, and a great part of it was because of the immortal scripture. Moreover, the thing that surprised and bewildered Yi Xian the most was that Grand Immortal Zhen Yuan's words faintly revealed that the immortal scripture could help him break through to the 3rd firmament of Grand Luo. Looks like Senior left me here, because you have a way to help me break through my current realm. Senior, please lend me a hand. Yi Xian spoke bluntly. The Empyrean Fairy grunted coldly. Obviously, her remaining anger towards Yi Xian hadn't subsided. As she listened to the conversation between Yi Xian and Grand Immortal Zhen Yuan, it allowed her to understand that Yi Xian's cultivation had stagnated at this moment. Yet Grand Immortal Zhen Yuan could help Yi Xian break through his current cultivation. Yi Xian directly treated the Empyrean Fairy's cold gaze as she watched from the sidelines. If it wasn't for Grand Immortal Zhen Yuan being able to help him break through to the second firmament, Yi Xian would have dealt with this woman's arrogance a long time ago. The immortal scripture is all-encompassing. Even though this cultivation technique is suspected to be from outside the three dimensions, the grand Tao of the heavens and the earth returns to one. If little friend is able to consume the energy-dissolving immortal Ganoderma, you'll naturally be able to break through to the second firmament. Grand Immortal Zhen Yuan smiled lightly. Energy-dissolving immortal Ganoderma? Yi Xian muttered to himself with a puzzled look in his eyes. This was because he had never heard of the energy-dissolving immortal Ganoderma, let alone know what it was used for. Impossible! Suddenly, the Empyrean fairy exclaimed in surprise. Senior Jinyuanzi, Her Highness Nuwa once said that there was only one energy-dissolving immortal Ganoderma in the world, and it was already consumed by Luo Ho, the demon ancestor Luo Ho, which allowed him to step into the quasi-saint realm. How could there be a second energy-dissolving immortal Ganoderma in the world? It was no wonder that the Empyrean fairy was so shocked. As the only disciple of Her Highness Nuwa, she naturally had a deep understanding of the divine items in the world. Moreover, she had personally heard Her Highness Nuwa mention the energy-dissolving immortal Ganoderma. Now that Grand Immortal Zhen Yuan mentioned it, it naturally made her extremely bewildered. If a saint had said that there was only one energy-dissolving immortal Ganoderma, then there really was only one. This was absolutely not a lie. Haha. Grand Immortal Zhen Yuan stroked his beard and laughed. Little girl, you don't know. Saint Nuwa wasn't wrong. When the world was first created, there was indeed only one energy-dissolving immortal Ganoderma. However, the world is divided into yin and yang, and all things have life and death. As the saying goes, yin and yang coexist to form all things in the world. Even the energy-dissolving immortal Ganoderma is no exception. The energy-dissolving immortal Ganoderma is divided into yin and yang. Back then, the demon ancestor Luo Ho consumed the energy-dissolving immortal Ganoderma that was filled with yin qi. That was why he was able to cultivate his demonic arts to great success, and finally step into the quasi-saint realm. However, the yang-type energy-dissolving immortal Ganoderma has always been in my hands. After endless time, it has finally matured. As long as my little friend Yi Xian can consume this yang-type energy-dissolving immortal Ganoderma, he will definitely be able to easily break through the second grand heavenly realm. It will also increase his chances of becoming a quasi-saint by 30%. As the Grand Immortal Zhen Yuan's words fell, the Empyrean fairy's expression changed drastically. She suddenly looked at Yi Xian with an extremely complicated expression in her beautiful eyes. Quasi-saint. It was a simple word, but it carried an extremely heavy meaning. Since the creation of the world, there were only 6 saints in the world. Below the 6 saints were the quasi-saints. Chapter 531. The birth of every quasi-saint is inseparable from the right time, the right place, and the right people. Moreover, they are truly supreme figures. Every word and action of theirs has the power to destroy the world. Just look at the Nether River Patriarch of the Nether Blood Sea. His reputation is out there. As long as the Blood Sea doesn't dry up, the Nether River won't die. Even a saint would find it extremely difficult to kill him. There's also the demon world created by the demon ancestor Luo Ho. As long as the resentment of the world doesn't vanish, he can rely on a trace of resentment to become immortal. He's truly a terrifying figure. There's also Zhen Yuanzi before them. He's known as the ancestor of earthly immortals. Although Zhen Yuanzi rarely makes a move, no one would underestimate this quasi-saint. The Empyrean fairy didn't expect that Zhen Yuanzi would actually judge that Yi Xian could become a quasi-saint. He even wanted to give him the essence-dissolving immortal Ganoderma to increase his chances of success by 30%. This simply made her feel extremely incredulous. One must know that although there aren't many people who have reached the third watershed of the grand heavenly realm in the world, there are definitely a lot of them. After all, from the primeval age to the current 3 realms, countless people have stepped into the third watershed of the grand heavenly realm. However, throughout the ages, How many people have become quasi-saints? May I know where the essence dissolving immortal Ganoderma is? If this junior can break through the shackles, this junior will definitely not forget senior's great kindness. Yi Xian cupped his hands and bowed. His words were extremely solemn. Peaches of immortality, ginseng fruits, blood god fruits, and many other spiritual herbs of the world. Yi Xian didn't know how many of them he had consumed, but the fourth heavenly realm of Grand Heavenly Realm was like a natural chasm in front of him that he couldn't cross at all. At this moment, Grand Immortal Zhen Yuan was willing to help him break through. This was a great opportunity for Yi Xian. How could he give it up? Haha. Grand Immortal Zhen Yuan stroked his beard and said with a smile, although the essence dissolving immortal Ganoderma is a supreme treasure of heaven and earth, it is of no great use to me. Zhen Yuanzi paused for a moment, then looked at Yi Xian and the Empyrean fairy. An unfathomable look flashed across his eyes as he said, however, the elemental immortal Ganoderma is also known as the yin-yang flower. It is born from the yin and yang qi of heaven and earth. This poor Taoist has planted it in a secret realm. This secret realm is filled with yin and yang qi. If you enter this place with your masculine body, you will be crushed into powder by the yin and yang qi. What does senior mean? Yi Xian was slightly taken aback. He could clearly sense that Zhen Yuanzi was implying something in his words. This caused his heart to sink as he probed Zhen Yuanzi. If you want to enter the world of yin and yang, you need yin and yang to complement each other. You have a yang body, and only the Empyrean fairy's extreme yin body can help you enter the secret realm. You will be able to safely obtain the elemental immortal Ganoderma, Grand Immortal Zhen Yuan said with a smile. Impossible. As soon as Grand Immortal Zhen Yuan finished speaking, the Empyrean fairy's expression changed. She immediately refused. It was simply impossible for her to help Yi Xian obtain the elemental immortal Ganoderma. Bang! Suddenly, before the Empyrean fairy could react, a dazzling fist of light suddenly enlarged in her eyes. The fist of light was like a star as it directly struck her forehead, causing her to stagger and her origin spirit to fall into a daze. Seal! Yi Xian gripped the top of the Empyrean fairy's head. The origin immortal light madly circulated, and the indestructible origin spirit in his sea of consciousness rumbled. The light of the origin spirit that could suppress all things spread out, instantly imprisoning the Empyrean fairy in the air. Yi Xian knew that the Empyrean fairy would never help him. Since that was the case, he could only mercilessly suppress the Empyrean fairy, so that he could do whatever he wanted with her. This child, Grand Immortal Zhen Yuan helplessly sighed, but he did not stop Yi Xian's ruthless actions. It was clear that while the Empyrean fairy was the disciple of Saint Nuwa, he was still on Yi Xian's side compared to Yi Xian. Senior, save me! The Empyrean fairy loudly called out, a hint of shame and anger in her eyes. She had never imagined that Yi Xian would attack without giving her any time to react. Yi Xian had already captured her. Empyrean fairy, it's not that this lowly Taoist doesn't want to save you, but I need you to lend our young friend Yi Xian a hand today. In the future, when our young friend Yi Xian becomes a quasi-saint, he will definitely repay your kindness today. The Grand Immortal Zhen Yuan consoled. Senior, you're scheming against me? If the Empyrean fairy still did not understand, she would be a little too stupid. From the moment they arrived at the Longevity Mountain, Yi Xian had mercilessly suppressed and humiliated him, even causing such a huge commotion. However, the Grand Immortal Zhen Yuan had not organized anything. When the Tao discussion ended, he had even left her behind with Yi Xian. It turned out that this was all part of the Grand Immortal Zhen Yuan's plan. He wanted her to help Yi Xian enter the yin-yang world to obtain the immortal elemental herb. Don't be angry, Empyrean fairy. This lowly Taoist wants to give the immortal elemental herb to our young friend Yi Xian. However, if this lowly Taoist enters the yin-yang world, the laws of yin and yang will definitely be out of balance, and the immortal elemental herb will be destroyed. I can only inconvenience you for this. The Grand Immortal Zhen Yuan sighed. Hearing Great Immortal Zhen Yuan's explanation, the mysterious maiden of the 9 heavens was so angry that she couldn't speak. So it turned out that great immortal Zhen Yuan had invited her to the 10,000 Years Mountain to make a wedding dress for Yi Xian Sr. With the Empyrean Fairies Company and our yin and yang qi complementing each other, it shouldn't be a problem for us to enter the yin-yang world to harvest the immortal elemental herb, right? Yi Xian said solemnly. Young friend, you must remember that the immortal elemental herb is planted in the center of the yin-yang world. You and the Empyrean Fairy must interlock your fingers. When you circulate your qi, you won't be attacked by the yin and yang qi, the grand immortal Zhen Yuan warned. As he waved his hand through the air, a door appeared. The terrifying yin and yang qi flowed through the door. Even though Yi Xian's origin immortal body was extremely powerful, he still felt greatly threatened. Go, the grand immortal Zhen Yuan said, stroking his beard. Yi Xian nodded solemnly. Regardless of whether the Empyrean Fairy was willing or not, he pulled her by the arm and entered the yin-yang world. Buzz. The door closed and the world was silent. Yi Xian and the Empyrean Fairy also disappeared from the fifth manor. Only the grand immortal Zhen Yuan had his hands behind his back, and the smile on his face gradually disappeared. Zhen Yuanzi, aren't you afraid that he will hate you? Suddenly, a calm voice was heard. The void behind Zhen Yuanzi rippled, and a Taoist in indigo appeared. Like an illusory mist, the mist obscured the eyes. This Taoist in green was covered by the immortal light, making it impossible for others to see his appearance. If Yi Xian saw this person, he would be extremely shocked, because this Taoist in indigo was also a sage-to-be. In addition to the grand immortal Zhen Yuan, there was another sage-to-be in the fifth manor. This was simply unbelievable and unimaginable. The grand immortal Zhen Yuan was indifferent to the Taoist in indigo's words, as if his appearance was within his expectations. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support. And don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.